The stave was already in Draska Vok's hand when Master Instructor Skarn looked up from the muster roll. And Skarn had been teaching young killers for 40 years, so he knew exactly what came next. He had seen the gesture 1,000 times. A big cadet stoops, lifts a discarded practice stave off the raked sand, and turns it in his grip the way a butcher turns a boning knife, not to fight, but to make a lesson of someone smaller. The stave was oak analog, hard blackwood grown on the Sethful home terraces, as long as a spear and heavy enough to break a jaw. Draska did not raise it to guard. He raised it to play. The something smaller was sitting on the edge of the muster ring with her boots in the sand, and a ration wafer half-eaten in one hand. She was the human. She was the only human on the moon, and she weighed less than a third of what Draska Vok weighed, and she did not look up. Skarn's mandibles tightened along their seam. He did not call out. That was his first mistake of the morning, and he would spend a long time afterward deciding whether it had been cowardice or curiosity, and never quite settling it. The ring at Carold was open to the sky. Above it the daylight came down cold and hard through the moon's thin dome-filtered air, a flat white brightness that threw no soft shadows, only clean ones. 200 cadets stood the morning muster in loose ranks along the sand, reptilian Sethful with their crested skulls, the blue-black insectoid V. Harun who had founded the college 9 centuries ago, soft-bodied Neth folded into their breathing shawls, a scattering of the four-armed Oral who mostly went for command track and looked down on everyone. They were the sons and daughters of warrior houses from 30 worlds. Every one of them had been bred, or born, or beaten into the certainty that violence was a language. They spoke better than anyone else alive. And into that certainty, 6 days ago, the preparatory had admitted a charity case. That was the word the cadets used, charity case. It had arrived on the supply lighter with the grain and the coolant and the mail, a single small biped in an ill-fitting cadet coverall that had been cut for a Neth and hung wrong on her frame. She had a duffel, a data slate, and a letter of admission bearing the seal of the Concord Exchange, the new treaty, the one nobody at Carold had voted for, the one that said the human worlds and the Concord would trade cadets as a gesture of trust. The human worlds had sent exactly one. The Concord in return had sent nobody, because nobody at any warcollege in Concord space had believed the exchange was serious. Skarn had read her file that first night. It was thin. Name, Ren Calloway. Age and standard years, 17. Homeworld, Earth, catalog designation pending review. Prior combat instruction, none listed. Recommending authority, a name he did not recognize from a service he had never heard of. There was a line at the bottom, machine appended, that he had read 4 times and then closed the file without understanding, because it made no sense and he had a muster to run. The line read, Homeworld hazard rating under Concord review, provisional Heronine, see addendum. There had been no addendum. The file simply stopped. Heronine. Skarn had almost laughed. The Hero scale ran from 1 to 9 and measured how hard a world tried to kill the things that lived on it. Carold recruited from worlds that rated Hero 4 to Hero 6 a proud, brutal places where children learned to run from something with teeth before they learned to speak. Draska Vok's homeworld, the Sethful Terraces, rated Hero 5, and Draska never let anyone forget it. A Heronine world was a theoretical thing, a number at the end of a scale that had no examples, the way mathematicians spoke of infinities they would never count to. So the machine had made an error. A charity case from a soft little exchange world had been tagged with a number meant for legend. Skarn had shrugged his upper thorax and gone to sleep. Now 6 days later, he watched Draska Vok turn the black stave in his hand and decided that the machine's error was about to become someone's problem, and that the someone would be the small human, and that this was, on balance, the natural order correcting itself. Draska was the biggest cadet in his intake and the loudest. His crest ran high and scarlet down the back of his skull, a mark of a pure Terrace bloodline, and he had spent 6 days making certain the human understood exactly how far beneath him she sat. He had knocked her tray from her hands in the mess. He had stood in the dormitory doorway so she had to duck under his arm. He had, twice, in the corridor, put a clawed hand flat on the top of her head and pushed her down as if measuring her against the height of a real cadet. Each time she had straightened, said nothing, and walked on. Each time the watching cadets had laughed, and Draska had grown a little larger in his own estimation, and the human had grown in theirs, a little more like furniture. She had not reported him. Skarn had noticed that. In 40 years he had learned that the ones who reported were the ones who would break early. The ones who endured in silence broke late, or not at all, or broke you. He had filed the observation and done nothing with it, because she was a charity case and would be gone by the turning of the season, sent home with a certificate of participation and a story to tell her soft little planet. "Get up," Draska said now. He said it in trade cant, the flat pidgin the college used across its 30 tongues, and he said it loudly enough that the nearer ranks went quiet to listen. The muster had not yet been called to order. That was the gap Draska had been waiting for, the loose few minutes at dawn when the instructors were counting heads and the cadets were still their own animals. Wren Calloway took another bite of the ration wafer. Skarn saw her do it. He saw the small, deliberate motion of it, the way she chewed and swallowed and did not hurry, and something very old in the back of his brain, some instinct that predated the college and the conquered and the whole civilized apparatus of graded worlds, stirred and did not like what it saw. He could not have said why. She was chewing a wafer, that was all. But a V. Harun's deep brain remembers a time before cities, when his ancestors had hunted in the mud tides, and that brain knew the difference between a creature that freezes because it is afraid and a creature that keeps eating because it has already decided you are not worth standing up for. "I said get up." Draska stepped closer and lowered the stave until the black end of it hovered a hand's width from her face. "The rest of us stand for muster. You sit in the dirt and eat like an animal. So," he smiled, which on a Sethville means showing the back teeth. "Stand, animal, or dance. I have not decided which is funnier." A ripple of laughter. 3 Sethville clan brothers behind him, crests up, enjoying it. A cluster of V. Harun cadets watching with the flat compound stare that gave nothing away. Near the back, a single Neth cadet, Asa, second form, the smallest of her people and easily the most frightened creature at Carold, had gone very still inside her breathing shawl, and her skin had shaded the pale gray of a Neth who wants to be somewhere else. Wren looked up. Skarn was 40 paces away and he still caught it, the thing that happened in her face when she finally raised her eyes to the stave. It was not fear. He had spent 40 years cataloging fear in the young, the widening, the freeze, the little tremor at the jaw hinge. This was none of that. Her face did something quieter and worse. It went still, the way the surface of a pool goes still, not because nothing is under it, but because everything under it has stopped moving at once and is now only waiting. She said something. Her voice did not carry, but Skarn read the shape of it on her mouth, in trade cant, 4 flat words. "You should put that down." Draska laughed. He drew the stave back over his shoulder in the long, showy arc of a Terrace duelist, the arc that says I am going to hit you slowly so that everyone can watch it land, and he brought it around toward the side of her head, not to kill, Skarn judged even then, but to knock her sprawling in the sand, to make the animal roll, to give the ranks their morning's laughter. Afterward, no one at Carold could agree on the order of what happened. Asa, who was closest, would say the stave never touched her. A Sethville clan brother would swear it did, that it struck her shoulder and simply stopped, as if the black wood had been swung into a wall built the same instant. The V. Harun cadets, whose compound eyes take in a wider slice of time than most, said 3 separate and contradictory things, which is what V. Harun always say when they have seen something their training did not prepare them to file. Skarn himself, who had watched more violence than any of them, saw it clean, and it was very simple, and it was the simplest things that stayed with him the longest. The human did not stand to meet the swing. Standing would have taken too long. She came off the edge of the ring low and fast and inside the arc of the stave, under it, the way you go under a falling thing rather than away from it, and her small hand closed on Draska's forearm just behind the wrist, and she turned. That was all. She turned the way a person turns a stubborn valve, using her whole weight low against a joint that was not built to fold in that direction. The stave was still traveling. Its momentum, meeting the sudden lock of the wrist, went where momentum goes when it cannot go forward into the nearest thing that would bend. The nearest thing that would bend was Draska Vox's elbow. The sound it made was not loud. That was the part the ranks remembered. 200 cadets bred to violence, and the thing that silenced them was how quiet it was, a single wet structural crack, the sound of a green branch failing, no louder than a dropped tray. The stave dropped from a hand that no longer had the architecture to hold it. Draska went down not because she pushed him, but because she stepped through him, past him, taking the fold of his arm to the ground with her so that a cadet who outweighed her threefold folded into the sand like a coat slipping off a hook, face first, crest in the dirt, one arm bent the wrong way beneath him and his own weight settling onto it. And then she let go and stepped back, and picked her ration wafer up out of the sand where it had fallen and looked at it, and did not eat it because it was dirty now, and that small human disappointment, the ruined wafer, the pursed consideration of it, was the last motion in the entire ring. Nobody breathed. Draska was screaming into the sand, high and cracked, a sound no one had ever heard him make, and it should have broken the spell, and it did not, because 200 young warriors were doing the arithmetic and coming up short. She had not been angry. That was the thing. There had been no rage in it, no snarl, no cry, none of the tells that told them a fight was a fight. She had done it the way a person closes a drawer that has been left open. And she was already looking past all of them, at the ration wafer, mildly annoyed, as if the largest cadet in the intake screaming at her feet were weather. Skarn found that he had come to his feet without deciding to. He crossed the sand. The ranks parted for him out of habit, but their eyes never left the human, and he understood the feeling in his own thorax now and named it, because a master instructor who cannot name a feeling is no use to anyone. It was the feeling of standing near a thing much stronger than yourself that has, for reasons of its own, chosen not to move. "Cadet," he said. Wren Calloway looked at him. Up close her eyes were an ordinary brown, and there was a smear of sand across one cheek, and a faint old scar through one eyebrow that the file had not mentioned, and she was breathing exactly as easily as she had been while eating. Not a killer's stillness performed for effect. Just stillness, the way water is still. "He swung first," she said, flat, no appeal in it. She was not defending herself. She was giving him information, the way you tell someone which way a spill is running so they can step around it. "I saw," Skarn said. "He shouldn't have picked it up," she said, and glanced down at the black stave in the sand as if it had been the one at fault, an object that ought to have known better than to be lifted. Then she looked back up at Skarn with something that was almost, but not quite, an apology not for Draska, but for the interruption. "Are we still doing muster?" Behind them, 2 of Draska's clan brothers had gotten over their shock and gone for her, low and fast, claws out, and Skarn opened his mandibles to bark them down, and did not need to. She had heard them coming, of course she had. Skarn would think about that for a long time too, that even with her back turned, even bending for a ruined wafer, some part of her had been keeping a running count of every large thing in the ring and where it stood. She did not turn to face them. She simply was not where the first one arrived. A half-step gone, and the clan brother's own lunge carried him past her into the muster post, and she put the flat of her boot against the back of his knee as he passed, and folded him down onto the sand beside Draska with an economy that had nothing to spare for cruelty. The second one stopped. Stopped hard, both feet, claws still out, a warrior of a Harrow 5 bloodline who had just watched his housemate fold on nothing. And for the first time in 6 days, a Sethful cadet looked at the human and understood that she had been letting them touch her. "We can finish muster," Wren said to Skarn in the ringing silence as if none of it had happened. "I don't mind waiting." Skarn stood in the center of the ring with 3 young warriors down in the sand around a small human who was looking at him for permission to resume a headcount. And above them, the cold white daylight came down through the dome, and 200 cadets from 30 worlds made no sound at all, and the master instructor of 40 years discovered that his mouth was dry. He did not finish muster. He looked instead past the human, past the folded cadets, to the far side of the ring where the duty medics were already running with a litter for Draska Vok, and beyond them to the high blank wall of the administrative spire where, he knew, a certain thin file was stored under the name Calloway, Wren, with a line at the bottom that ended in the word addendum and no addendum after it. Provisional Heronine, the machine had said. Skarn was beginning to suspect the machine had been trying to warn them, and that it had been the only thing at Carold with the sense to do so. "Medic first," he said aloud to no one, and then because 40 years of command do not leave you even when your mouth is dry. "The rest of you, ranks." Now, and they formed ranks faster than they had ever formed for him, and it was not respect for Skarn that did it. It was that 200 young warriors had just learned that standing in a loose crowd near the human felt, suddenly, like standing in loose sand at the edge of a tide, and they all wanted, very badly, to know exactly where their feet were. Wren Calloway brushed the sand off her coverall, stepped back to the edge of the ring and stood the muster like everyone else. She did not look at Draska again. She had already, Skarn understood, stopped thinking about him entirely. He was a solved problem. She had swept him from the surface of her attention the way you sweep a broken thing off a table without malice because the table needed to be clear. It took Draska Vok 40 days to walk again, and by then the college had a new kind of quiet in it, and the quiet had a name, and the name was not on any muster roll, and every cadet at Carold knew it anyway. Warden Skorin had 4 arms and used all of them at once when she was angry, and she was angry now, in the cold, precise way of the oral, which involves no shouting and a great deal of paperwork. "You will explain to me," she said, "how a charity admit put 3 of my cadets in the infirmary before the morning meal." Skarn stood in the warden's office with his hands folded behind his thorax and considered his answer. The office was high in the administrative spire, walled in glass on the sun's side, and the flat daylight of Viharn Secundus came through it and lay in long clean bars across the warden's desk, across the disciplinary slates she had already stacked there, across the 2 upper hands she was using to sort them, and the 2 lower hands she had folded, deceptively still, in her lap. Skorin had commanded a border fleet before she had ever commanded a college. She did not stack slates because she was flustered. She stacked them because a moving hand keeps the other 3 honest. She did not put them in the infirmary, Skarn said. They put themselves there. She merely declined to be where their attacks were. Semantics. Precision, Warden. You taught me the difference. Skorin's upper hands went still. That was, Skarn knew, a good sign. An oral who stops moving is an oral who has decided to listen. Draska Vok swung a training stave at her head, Skarn went on. The full duelist's arc in front of 200 witnesses before muster was called. She warned him. He laughed and swung. She took his arm away from him and put him down. 2 of his clan brothers rushed her from behind and she declined them as well. At no point did she pursue, escalate, or strike a blow that was not a redirection of theirs. At no point did she raise her voice. When it was finished, she asked me whether we would still be doing muster. She asked, the warden stopped, recalibrated. She asked to continue the head count. She did not appear to consider the matter concluded worth discussing. Skorin set down the slate in her upper right hand. She looked out the glass wall at the ring, small and far below, where the morning stain had already been raked out of the sand by cadets on punishment detail. Not the human's punishment, Skarn noted, but detail assigned to Draska's surviving clan brothers for brawling. The optics of it had not escaped the warden. 3 cadets of a proud HFY bloodline, laid out by a soft exchange biped, and the college's own regulations pointed the finger of fault squarely at the boys. "The Sethville Combine will hear of this by nightfall," she said. "Draska's house sits 2 seats from the Combine chair. They did not send their son here to be crippled by a conquered novelty. They sent him to be made into a weapon and returned to them sharpened. When they learn how, he was blunted. They will demand she be expelled. They will demand she be removed." The warden's lower hands had unfolded now, and that was not a good sign at all. "There is a difference, and you know it. The Combine does not care about certificates. They care about the story. And the story, Skarn, cannot be that a warrior of the terraces was folded like wet cloth by an animal from a world so soft. The exchange treaty had to be forced through the conquered over the objection of every college on this arm of the reach. That story does not stay in this ring. That story travels. And when it arrives, it does not arrive as a curiosity. It arrives as a wound to 30 warrior houses who have staked their honor on the belief that they are the most dangerous thing their children will ever meet." Skarn said nothing. He had learned over 40 years that a warden thinking aloud does not want a chorus. So, HFYStories turned from the glass. "We will do this correctly. We will not expel her. That is an admission that she frightened us, and we will not give the Combine that. We will assess her, formally, through the college's own instruments under witness by the book. And the instruments will find what the instruments always find in charity admits, that a fortunate reflex and a large opponent's overconfidence produced one lucky morning, and that under real load, under graded pressure, the animal is exactly what her homeworld's soft rating says she is." She paused. "The instruments will do this because they are fair, Skarn, not because I have told them what to conclude. You understand the distinction." "I understand that you have chosen the instrument already," Skarn said, "or you would not have that particular slate on the top of your stack." The warden did not deny it. She picked up the top slate and turned it so he could read the header. Skarn read it and felt the old cold thing stir again in the back of his brain. "The cull," he said. "The graded gauntlet," she corrected. "By its proper name. Full instrumentation. Every station scored. If she is what her rating says, she washes out at the 4th station like a first form honorably with her participation certificate intact, and the Combine gets its story. The animal tried and failed. The terraces remain unbroken. Everyone goes home. If she is more than her rating," HFYStories set the slate down with a click that was, for an oral, an admission of something. "Then I would very much like to know it before the Combine does, wouldn't you?" Skarn looked at the slate. The graded gauntlet was not, strictly, a killing course. That was the official position, and it was even mostly true. It was 11 stations of escalating combat pressure, reflex, load-bearing, pain tolerance, multi-opponent, terrain, the rest, that the college used at the end of a cadet's 3rd form to sort the finishers from the washouts. It broke bones every season. It had killed over 9 centuries, more cadets than the college liked to publish, and the cadets it killed were 3rd form warriors of graded worlds who had trained 4 years to enter it. To run a charity, admit through it in her first week, was not an assessment. It was a sentence with the safety of deniability built in. And the warden knew that he knew. That was the thing about HFYStories. She did not lie to her instructors. She simply let them watch her choose. When Skarn said, 3 days. Enough for the Combine to hear that we have not swept it away. Enough for Draska's house to be told the animal will face the college's hardest instrument under full witness, and to be satisfied that we take the insult seriously. Her upper hands folded again. You will inform her. You will not soften it. If she declines, she withdraws from the exchange and goes home, and the story ends the quiet way. If she accepts, a very small motion of the oral head that in a human would have been a shrug. Then the instrument decides, and none of us has to. Skarn found the human in the maintenance bay of the lower yard that evening, and the finding of her there told him more than her file had. She was not in the dormitory. She was not in the mess, licking her wounds, or in the training halls, desperately drilling against the assessment she must have known was coming. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the maintenance bay with the guts of a coolant regulator spread out on a cloth in front of her, cleaning grit out of a valve seat with a shaped pick, and the bay's Harun quartermaster, old Tesh, who trusted no one, was leaning against the wall watching her work with the particular satisfaction of a craftsman who has found competent hands. "She fixes things," Tesh said when Skarn came in. He did not say it as an accusation. He said it the way you report a small miracle. Came in the second day looking for a spare shawl clip for the Neth girl, the little one, Asa. Saw the regulator on my bench in pieces. Asked if she could look. I said no. Tesh's mandibles clicked. She looked anyway, had it stripped and diagnosed before I finished telling her not to. It was the third stage, Governor. I have 3 technicians who missed the third stage, Governor. Wren did not look up from the valve seat. "The grit's silicate," she said, to the regulator, or to Tesh, or to no one. "You've got a filter breaching upstream. This'll clog again in 40 days if nobody finds the breach." She set the pick down, held the valve seat up to the light, turned it, and began reassembling the regulator with the unhurried certainty of someone who has taken a great many broken things apart and put them back together and finds the process restful. Skarn crouched at the edge of the cloth. Up close, in the working light, she looked even smaller and even more ordinary, a young biped with grease on her knuckles and that faint old scar through the eyebrow, and a way of holding her whole body loose and economical, nothing clenched, nothing wasted. He had come to deliver a sentence. He found himself, instead, watching her hands. "The warden has decided how to assess you," he said. "The gauntlet," Wren said. She seated a spring, thumbed it home. "Tesh told me this morning, word travels." "Then you know what it is." "I know what he told me." She glanced up briefly, and there was nothing in her face but a mild attentiveness, the look of someone confirming a delivery. 11 stations. It's killed people. She's running me through it in my first week because a boy swung a stick at me and it went badly for the boy. And now 30 houses need to watch the animal fail properly, so nobody has to admit what they saw in the ring. She set the reassembled regulator down on the cloth, whole. "Did I miss anything?" Skarn was quiet for a moment. He had prepared, on the walk down, a version of this in which he did not soften it and did not warn her and simply delivered the warden's terms. He abandoned that version. "Cadets die in the gauntlet who have trained 4 years for it," he said. "You have trained none. The stations are graded to break third-form warriors. There is no fault in withdrawing. Withdrawal ends the exchange. You go home with a certificate. No one will call it cowardice who has any right to an opinion." "And the boy?" "Drasko. When I fail properly." Wren wiped her hands on the cloth. "He walks again. His house is satisfied. The story becomes, the animal got one lucky morning and then the instruments put her back in her place. And every cadet who watched the ring learns that what they saw wasn't real because the college proved it wasn't." She looked at him, and for the first time there was something behind the stillness, not anger. He would have understood anger, but a kind of patient, ancient weariness, as if she had had this exact conversation before on other worlds in other rings and knew every turn of it before it came. "That's the story your warden's buying. That's what the gauntlet's for, not to test me. To unhappen this morning." "Yes," Skarn said, because she had earned the truth and because he found he could not lie to her any more than he could lie to Ilek Skorin. "That is what it is for." Wren nodded slowly. She began wrapping her tools in the cloth, corner over corner, neat. "Tell her I accept," she said. "Cadet." "I know what it is." She tied the cloth off. "I've known what it was since the second day when I fixed the little one's shawl clip, and 3 of them cornered her in the wash hall for talking to me, and I stood in the doorway and they left. I've known what this place is since the lighter opened its doors." She stood, unfolding without effort, and picked up the wrapped tools. "You want to know if I'm going to break in your gauntlet, Master Instructor? So does your warden. So do 30 houses. I understand. It's a fair question." She paused at the door of the maintenance bay, and the flat evening daylight from the yard beyond lit one side of her ordinary face. "You should all watch closely. It's the only way you'll ever believe the answer." She left. Tesh looked at the reassembled regulator on the cloth, whole and clean and quietly correct, and then at Scarn and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the regulator had not already said better. Scarn climbed back to the spire that night and stood a long time at the glass wall of his own quarters, looking down at the ring, dark now under the moon's second sun, and he thought about the line at the bottom of a thin file. Provisional Heronine. See addendum. There had been no addendum because, he was beginning to understand, no one had been left to write one. You do not survive to file a report on a Heronine world. The machine had not made an error. The machine had reached the edge of what it was permitted to say and stopped, the way a sane creature stops at the edge of a cliff, and the college had read the stopping as a blank and filled the blank with contempt. 3 days, the warden had said. 3 days until the college ran its hardest instrument against the animal to prove she was soft. Scarn found that he was no longer certain who was being assessed. The graded gauntlet ran under the Great South Dome, and on the morning of the assessment the college found reasons to be there. They came in their off hours in numbers Scarn had not seen since the last Combine visitation, cadets crowding the observation galleries, instructors who had no station to run, even a cluster of the kitchen Neth peering down from a service catwalk before their overseer chased them back to the ovens. Word had traveled, exactly as the warden intended, but it had traveled wrong. Ilex Scorin had meant the college to gather and watch the animal fail properly, a public correction. Instead, the college had gathered the way crowds gather at the foot of a cliff where someone is said to be about to jump, half of them certain she would, half of them not, all of them unwilling to hear about it second-hand. Ren Calloway stood at the mouth of the first station in a cadet's training rig that finally fit. Tesh had taken it in himself overnight without being asked, and she looked, Scarn thought, exactly as unremarkable as she had looked eating a wafer in the sand. Small, ordinary, a little dirt already on the knuckles from something, waiting. The warden sat in the raised examiner's box with 3 station masters and a Combine observer who had arrived on the dawn lighter, a Sethful of Draska's house, tall and silent, crest banded in the gray of a formal mourning that was itself an insult, as if the boy were already dead of the shame. Ilex Scorin had positioned him where he could see everything. She wanted a witness of the highest possible rank. She was going to get one. Station 1, the head station master called. Reflex under strike, standard grading. The first station was a corridor of pendulum arms, weighted padded booms swung on tracks at increasing speed, the classic opener, meant to sort the cadets who could read a fast environment from the ones who couldn't. A washout here was rare and shameful. Even first forms usually cleared it at low grade. The instrument started the booms slow and would ratchet them, station master's discretion, until the cadet was struck or reached the end. She reached the end. That was not remarkable. What was remarkable was that the station master, a hard old Viharun named Daln who had graded this corridor for 30 years, kept ratcheting the speed long after protocol said stop, past third form grade, past the fastest setting he had ever certified. His mandibles working, because the small biped was walking, not sprinting, walking through booms that were now moving fast enough to break a Sethful's ribs, and she was not dodging them so much as simply not being where they were. A half-beat of anticipation on every arm, reading the whole moving corridor the way Tesh read a stripped engine. She reached the far mark and stopped and waited, and Daln's hand was still on the speed dial, and the dial was at its stop, and the booms were a blur, and the human had not been touched. Grade, the head station master said. Daln did not answer for a moment. Off scale, he said finally, and the word went up into the galleries and came back down as a sound Skarn had never heard a crowd of warriors make, not a cheer, not a jeer, a low, uneven murmur, the sound of 200 certainties shifting a hand's width and finding no floor beneath them. The Combine observer wrote something on his slate. "Station 2, the head station master called, and there was a new note in his voice, the note of a man who has decided to stop being surprised on schedule. Load bearing, graded weight, graded distance." The second station was a killing floor for the proud. It buried you under weight and made you carry it, and it broke the ones whose strength was all show. The Sethful terraces bred for it. Draska would have thrived here. The human was a third their mass and had, by every scale the college owned, no business under a graded load at all. They loaded her. She carried it. She was slow. This was the one station where her size told against her, and Skarn saw her legs shake under the graded weight, saw the cost of it write itself plainly across her ordinary face. But she did not stop, and she did not set it down, and she did not make a sound. And when the distance mark was reached, she lowered the load the way Tesh lowered a delicate part, controlled all the way down, nothing dropped. Her grade was middling. Middling. A cadet from a Harrow 2 world might have matched it. And somehow that middling grade unsettled the galleries more than the off-scale one had, because it meant the first station had not been a fluke or a trick of size. She was not fast because she was small. She was fast, and she was also willing to suffer, and the two things did not usually come in the same body. "She feels it," murmured one of the station masters in the box, half to himself. "Look at her. It costs her. She simply does not appear to regard the cost as a reason to stop." "That is not a grade," the warden said. "No, warden," the station master said. "It is worse than a grade. It is a temperament." Station 3 was pain tolerance, and Skarn had argued against including it for years and lost, because the Combine houses insisted a warrior be tested against agony as against any other opponent. The instrument delivered graded neural load through contact points, no injury, all signal, the pure sensation of damage without the damage. Cadets rang the withdrawal bell at their own threshold. The grade was the threshold. Strong cadets held to the 6th band, weeping, and rang out with honor. The instrument went to 10. No one had ever reached 10, because the 9th band was calibrated to the point at which a graded warrior's mind simply refused to keep the hand off the bell. They fitted the human with the contact points. The station master watched his readout. He brought it to the 1st band and she did not move. 2nd, 3rd. The galleries had gone quiet again. 4th band, 5th, and Skarn saw the sweat stand out on her, saw her jaw set, saw her breathing change to the slow, deliberate count of someone who has done this before and has a method in through a slow count, hold out through a slower one, and her hand stayed open on her knee, nowhere near the bell. 6th band. 7th. The station master looked up at the box, and the warden gave no sign, and he went to the 8th, and a Sethful cadet in the front gallery who had been part of the wash hall cornering 3 days ago turned and walked out, because he could not watch it, and Skarn understood the boy perfectly. It is one thing to see a creature stronger than you. It is another to see a creature that will simply outlast anything you can put it through, that treats agony not as an enemy but as weather to be waited out, and to understand in your gut that there is no floor to it, no place where it stops, that if the instrument had 100 bands, she would breathe through all 100 with her hand open on her knee. She reached the 9th band, held it. The station master's hand hovered over the 10th, the theoretical band, the one with no calibration because no mind was thought to survive intact past the 9th, and he looked at the warden, and this time Ilex Skorran spoke. "Enough," the warden said, not because the human had reached her limit, because the instrument had reached its own, and to continue was to learn something the warden was not ready to know in front of a Combine observer. "Grade the 9th. Move on." Wren Calloway pulled the contact points off herself, one at a time, her hands not quite steady, and she sat for a moment with her forearms on her knees and her head down, breathing the slow count, paying the cost the way she had paid the cost of the load visibly, without complaint, and then setting it down. When she stood level. She looked up at the examiner's box, at the warden, at the gray-crested Combine observer beside her, and she did not glare and did not smile. She simply let them see her face, which had nothing in it but the fatigue of hard work and a patience that was starting at the edges to look like something older than patience. The observer had stopped writing on his slate. They ran the rest. Terrain in the flooded chamber, where she read the current and the footing like a thing that had grown up crossing rivers that wanted to drown her, which Scarn was beginning to understand she had. Multi-opponent, 4 graded sparring drones at once, where she did not try to beat them so much as arrange them, moving so that they fouled each other's lines, taking each one off the board with the same economical redirection she had used on Draska, never a wasted motion, never a struck blow that was more than a closed drawer. Blade work, where they gave her a training edge and she held it wrong, by the college's forms, and the station master opened his mouth to correct her grip, and then closed it, because whatever she was doing with the wrong grip was ending the drones faster than the right grip ever had. Station by station, the galleries went from murmur to silence to a stillness that was almost reverent and almost afraid. Station by station, the Combine observer's slate stayed dark. And station by station, Scarn watched the warden's 4 hands, and saw the upper 2 go still, and stay still, and the lower 2 unfold and lie flat and open on the arms of her chair, which he had never in 20 years seen Scarn do, because it was the posture of an oral who has stopped calculating and started simply watching. The way you watch weather come in off the sea when it is already too late to do anything but note where it will make landfall. At the 11th station, the finisher, the one that broke 3rd forms, a single graded combat drone dialed to the highest certified lethality the college's insurers permitted. Ren Calloway stood in the ring and waited for the machine to come at her, and it came, fast and precise and pitiless, everything 9 centuries of institutional violence could build into a single opponent, and she watched it for exactly as long as it took to learn it, 1 exchange 2, giving ground, reading. And on the 3rd she stopped giving ground and took it striking limb the way she had taken Draska's, low, through the joint, using its own committed weight against the one direction it could not brace, and the drone's arm sheared at the actuator with a crack that was, again, not loud, and it staggered. And she stepped through it and put it down, and stood over it in the flat white daylight with her chest heaving and her knuckles bleeding and her face, still, absolutely still, turned up toward the examiner's box. "Grade," said the head station master, and his voice was not steady. No one in the box answered. The graded gauntlet had 11 stations and a maximum aggregate score that no cadet in 9 centuries had ever reached, and the human had not reached it either, because she had lost points on the load and points on a blade form she held wrong, and none of that mattered to anyone in the South Dome, because the gauntlet had been built to answer one question: will this one break under real load? And it had answered. And the answer was written on 200 silent faces, and on the 4 open hands of the warden, and on the dark, untouched slate of the Combine observer, who now rose from his seat slowly, and looked down at the small human standing over the wreck of the college's hardest instrument, and did the one thing no one in the South Dome had expected. He inclined his crest. A hand's width, the sethful bow of a warrior to a warrior, given in gray mourning bands by a member of a house 2 seats from the Combine chair, to an animal from a world so soft the treat he had to be forced. And then he sat back down and wrote, at last, a single line on his slate, and Scarn was near enough on the tier below to read it as the observer's stylus moved, and it was not a report of failure, and it was not the story the warden had commissioned. It read, "Recommend the college cease testing the human. Recommend the college begin listening to her." The warden read it too. Scarn watched her read it. And Scarn, who had brought the human to her hardest instrument to unhappen one morning, folded all 4 of her hands in her lap, And for a long moment, the border fleet commander, who had never in Skarn's memory been at a loss, looked down at Ren Calloway with an expression that oral faces are not built to make and made anyway. It was the expression of a commander who has just realized that the reinforcements she called for have arrived, and that she does not command them, and that she never did. Asa had never had a friend at Carold, and she did not know how to describe what the human was, so she settled on the word ally, which was a word warriors used, and therefore a word she was permitted. Asa was Neth, and small even for Neth, and the softest-bodied creature in her form. Her people did not fight. They engineered, they navigated, they kept the reactors of the Reach from going critical, and they had been admitted to the warcolleges only because the founding charter required a technical caste, and someone had to keep Carold's cooling loops from killing everyone in their sleep. The warrior cadets tolerated the Neth the way you tolerate the pipes in a wall. Useful. Beneath notice. Struck when they made a sound. Asa made sounds. She could not help it. When she was frightened, her skin lit, a bioluminescent flush the color of a wound, involuntary, a beacon that announced her terror to every predator instinct in the dormitory. And at Carold there was always something to be frightened of, so Asa spent most of her waking hours glowing faintly and being struck for it. On the second day, a small biped she had never seen had crouched in front of her in the wash hall, ignored the 3 Sethful cadets who had backed Asa into the corner, fixed the broken clip on Asa's breathing shawl with 2 quick turns of a shaped pick, and said, without looking at the Sethful, "You can go now." And they had gone. Asa had not understood why they had gone. She understood now. She had followed the human ever since, at a distance, the way a small fish follows a large, indifferent shape through dangerous water, and the human had let her, which Asa took to be the highest honor of her life. The night after the gauntlet, the dormitory did not sleep. Asa felt it before she understood it, the wrongness in the dark, the absence of the ordinary sounds, the way the Sethful bunks at the far end of the long hall had gone quiet in a coordinated way that quiet does not usually go. Her skin began to light. She clamped her shawl over herself to smother it and lay rigid in her bunk with her breathing membranes flat, and she listened, and she heard the soft click of claws on decking, many of them, moving with the deliberate care of predators who have agreed on a plan. They were going for the human. Ren's bunk was at the end of the transient row apart, where the college housed the ones who did not belong to a house, the Neth, the 2 oral command track loners, the human. Asa's bunk was 3 down. She lay in the dark and watched shapes detach themselves from the Sethful end of the hall, low, crested silhouettes against the faint blue of the corridor safety lights, and she counted them because counting was a thing her people did when they could do nothing else. 6. Draska's clan brothers and their cousins, the whole Terrace bloodline of the boy whose arm was still splinted in the infirmary, and they were not carrying training staves. Asa saw the dull gleam of the real thing in 2 of their hands, Terrace knives, curved, the kind the combine houses were permitted to keep as ceremonial regalia, and were absolutely not permitted to draw inside the college walls. They had decided, Asa understood, that the gauntlet had made it worse, that the college watching the animal succeed was a wound that could only be closed one way, in the dark, off the record, an accident, a conquered novelty found dead in her bunk, and the exchange quietly ended, and the story finally the right story. The animal came, the animal overreached, the animal did not last the season. Asa's skin blazed. She could not stop it. She was going to give it away. She was going to glow like an alarm, and they would kill her for it. And she opened her breathing membranes to scream a warning, and no sound came out because her people's warnings were light, not sound. And she was already screaming the only way she knew how, a small, terrified, soft-bodied creature glowing wound-red in the dark, 3 bunks from the human, useless. Ren was already awake. Asa saw it. In the blue safety light she saw the human's eyes open, not startle open, just open, the way Tesh's diagnostic panels came alive, already reading, and she understood that the human had been awake the whole time, had heard the claws before Asa had lain still and let it come the way she had lain still, and let the terrace boys touch her for 6 days, gathering information, counting, waiting to see how far they would take it before she decided how far to take it back. Ren sat up. She did not reach for a weapon because she did not have one and did not, Asa would realize later, consider the distinction important. She swung her legs off the bunk and set her bare feet on the cold decking, and looked at the 6 crested shapes closing on her in the dark. And she said, in trade cant, quietly enough that it did not wake the far end of the hall but clearly enough that every one of the 6 heard it. Asa, cover your eyes. And Asa, without understanding, obeyed, clamping her membranes shut over her sight. And so she did not see the thing that 6 Sethful warriors of a Harrow 5 bloodline saw in the last unglowing dark of the transient dormitory, and she was, ever after, glad of it. She heard it, though. She heard the first knife leave a hand, and strike the wall where the human was not. She heard the human move that specific sound, cloth and bare feet and a displacement of air, so economical it was almost nothing. She heard a body meet the decking, and another, and a terrace knife skit her away across the floor, and a Sethful voice begin a war cry and stop it in the middle, not because he chose to stop but because something had closed his throat's ability to make sound. She heard bone. Twice. The same green branch crack she had heard in the ring. The sound she now understood was the sound of the human deciding a limb had finished being a threat. She heard the largest of the 6, the cousin they called Vrol, roar and charge. She felt the deck shudder with his weight, and she heard the roar turn, mid-stride, into a short surprised exhalation, and then into the long, wet, high sound of a proud warrior discovering his own knee no longer pointed the way knees point. And then she heard nothing move except the human, walking, unhurried, across the dormitory, and the wet, ragged breathing of 6 terrace warriors who had come in the dark to kill an animal, and were now on the floor of the transient row in various arrangements they had not chosen. You can look now, Asa, Ren said. Asa opened her membranes. The blue safety light showed her the human standing in the center of the transient row, barefoot, in a sleep shift, entirely unmarked, holding nothing. Around her, 6 Sethful cadets lay where they had been set down, not killed, Asa saw, not one of them killed, but each one comprehensively, precisely, unarguably removed from the fight. An arm here, a knee there, a shoulder that would not answer, each injury the smallest possible injury that would end a warrior's ability to continue, chosen and delivered with the cold economy of someone who found killing them wasteful and their weapons more interesting than their pride. The 2 terrace knives lay together on the decking by the human's foot, where she had gathered them, side by side, neat, the way she wrapped her tools. Ren looked down at Vrol, who was the only one still trying to rise, dragging himself upright on the one leg that still worked, his face contorted not with pain but with a horror deeper than pain, the horror of a creature whose entire understanding of himself has just been folded the wrong way through a joint. And she crouched in front of him the way she had crouched in front of Asa in the wash hall, patient level, and she spoke to him, and Asa heard it, and remembered every word. I've been letting you, Ren said, all of you, 6 days. I let the boy push my head down, I let you take my tray. I let it get this far because on my world, when something big keeps testing something small, you let it learn on its own how far it can go because the lesson lasts longer than the fight. She picked up one of the terrace knives, turned it in the blue light, examining the edge with the same craftsman's attention she gave a stripped regulator, and set it down again out of his reach. This is how far. You came in the dark with blades to end me quiet. That's the far end. There isn't any farther. So now you know, and now everyone your house tells this to will know, and the knowing is the point, Vrol. Not the arm, the knowing. Vrol made a sound. It might have been a word. It might have been the beginning of the college's second oldest instinct, the one that comes after fear, the one that makes a small creature stop being a rival and start being a follower. Go to the infirmary, Ren told him, not unkindly. All of you. Walk if you can, crawl if you can't. Tell them what you like. I'll tell them the truth if they ask, and the truth is worse than any lie you'll invent, so I'd invent carefully." She straightened. She gathered the 2 terrace knives, both of them, and Asa understood that the human was taking them, keeping them, that 6 warriors had come to kill her, and she was leaving with their ancestral blades as casually as she had left the ring with Draska's stave in the sand. Spoils she had not asked for and would not boast of, and would probably, Asa thought, disassemble by morning to see how they were made. Then Wren Calloway went back to her bunk, in a room full of broken terrace warriors, lay down and slept. Asa watched her chest go slow, and even within 100 breaths, as if the whole thing had been an interruption on the order of a dripping pipe, dealt with, filed, forgotten. Asa did not sleep. Asa lay glowing softly in the dark and watched over the human who did not need watching over, because it was the only thing her small, soft, useless body could offer, and because she had understood something in the blue-lit dark that the warrior cadets, with all their bred certainty, had spent 6 days refusing to understand. The human was not dangerous because she was strong. Carol was full of strong. The human was dangerous because she did not want anything from any of them. She could not be threatened into obedience because she did not fear them. She could not be baited into rage because she did not hate them. She could not be impressed into submission because there was nothing they could show her that her own soft, green, drowning, devouring homeworld had not shown her first and worse. She simply moved through Carol the way water moves through a broken hull, without malice, without hurry, finding every gap, and drowning in perfect indifference anything that stood where the water needed to go. By the 3rd morning after the gauntlet, all 6 of Draska's bloodline were in the infirmary, and the Sethful Combine had been informed, and the story the warden had tried to build, the animal fails properly. The terraces remain unbroken, lay in as many pieces as the college's hardest instrument. And so the Combine sent for a champion. Gareth's son had killed on 9 worlds for pay, and he had never been afraid on any of them, and he did not expect the small biped standing across the ring from him to be the exception, because he had read her file on the crossing, and her file was a joke. He was of the Wren, the tribal caste warriors of the Ash Steppes, taller than a Sethful and heavier than an Oral, his hide plated in the grown horn armor his people wore from birth, and scarred it into over a lifetime, his eyes the flat molten yellow that his people's prey learned to see just before the end. The Combine had hired him through 3 brokers so the college's hands would stay clean. His contract was written in the careful language of the Reach, a demonstration bout, sanctioned under witness to restore the standing of the terrace houses, the human to be given every honor and every chance, the outcome, should the human fall, to be recorded as the honest result of an honest contest. There were no words in the contract about killing. There did not need to be. Gareth had been hired 9 times to end a problem inside the rules, and he had ended 9 problems, and the rules had held every time. He had come a day early to walk the college and take its measure, which was his habit, and the college had disturbed him in a way the file had not prepared him for. It was too quiet. A warcollege the day before a sanctioned bout should have been loud, the galleries taking wagers, the cadets boasting on behalf of their champion, the whole institution feeding on the anticipation of blood not its own. Carol was silent. The cadets he passed did not boast. They watched him the way you watch a man who has bought something you know to be defective and has not yet opened the box. In the mess, a table of Sethful proud-crested terrace boys, the champion's natural clack, had gone quiet when he sat near them, and one of them, young, splint on his arm, had looked at Gareth with an expression the Wren had seen before, but never on the face of the side that had hired him. It was pity. "You have fought many things," the young Sethful said. His name, Gareth would learn, was Draska Vok. "I offer you no insult, but you should know that we hired you to make this right, and I no longer believe it can be made right, and I would not take the coin you are taking for any price on the steps." "Boy," Gareth said, I have killed things that hunted in the dark of worlds your kind cannot name. She is a soft worlder half my mass, with no training in her file. Her file, said Draskavok, and something moved behind his crest that Gareth did not like, is wrong. Everything about her that is written down is wrong. That is the first thing you should understand about the human. The paper lies, and it does not lie to protect her. It lies because whoever wrote it could not make their hand form the truth. He rose, splinted arm cradled against his chest, and looked down at the mercenary his own house had bought. She took this from me with a stick I handed her. She was eating breakfast. She warned me first. He walked away and stopped and said over his shoulder the thing that stayed with Gareth through the long night before the bout. When she comes at you, she will not be angry. Watch for that. It is the last thing you will have time to notice. That night Gareth's son did the thing he had done before 9 kills, and it did not comfort him. He read the file again. And then, because the young Sethful had put a burr under his hide, he went to the one place in a warcollege where the truth is kept whether or not the truth is convenient, the archive. The archivist was an old oral named Vale, 4-armed and half-blind and utterly without deference, who had kept Carroll's records for 60 years, and regarded champions, cadets, and wardens alike as temporary phenomena passing through her permanent domain. She listened to Gareth's request, sniffed, and told him the college file was a summary drawn from the Concord admissions packet, and worth exactly what a summary was worth. The full instruments underneath, she said. The raw Concord catalog entry. Nobody reads it. It came through sealed, and the warden's office ordered it filed unopened, which is the surest way to make me open a thing. She worked a query into a reader with 2 hands and pushed the output across to him with a third. Here is your soft worlder's homeworld, mercenary. Read it yourself. I'll not summarize it for you. Summaries are how this college got into its present difficulty. Gareth's son read the Concord catalog entry for the human homeworld, and the reading of it took him a long time, because it was not short, and because he found himself going back over lines to be sure he had understood. The world was rated provisionally at the top of a scale he had assumed had no top, Heronine. He had thought, as everyone thought, that the 9th band was a theoretical ceiling, a mathematician's number. The entry corrected him. The 9th band was not the ceiling. The 9th band was the highest rating the Concord's instruments could measure before the instruments themselves failed to survive the measurement, and the human world had saturated it. Every metric pinned, every category maxed, and a machine-appended note. The same note Scarn had read and closed, and Gareth now read and could not close at the bottom. Recommend suspension of survey. Recommend the designation Harrow Absolute be reserved. Recommend no further landing. And then the catalog did the thing that turned the burr under Gareth's hide into a cold, slow certainty. It listed, in the dry taxonomic language of the Reach, a partial index of the world's apex fauna, the predators that shared the human's homeworld, the things she had grown up among, and beside each entry was a note on its relationship to the dominant species. Gareth had expected the humans to be prey on such a world. Everything was prey on a Heronine world. That was what Heronine meant. The humans were not prey. Beside entry after entry, the pack hunters, the ambush killers, the great things of the deep water and the high cold, the catalog recorded the same dry note, again and again, in the flat voice of a survey team that had plainly stopped being able to believe its own findings. Predation reversed. Species extirpated by dominant. Species domesticated by dominant. Species hunted recreationally by dominant. The human world had produced apex predators without number, every one of them a nightmare that would have ruled any graded world in the Reach, and the small soft bipeds' ancestors had walked out among them with sharpened sticks and run them down on foot over distances that killed the prey by exhaustion, and eaten them, and tamed their children, and kept some of the deadliest as companions for the warmth of it. And it had gone on like that for so long that the humans had stopped being able to see it as remarkable. They were not the survivors of a Heronine world. They were the reason it was Heronine. Gareth's son set the reader down. Across the archive, old Vale watched him with her half-blind eyes and said nothing, because she had watched a great many people read that entry over the past 2 days. The warden had come, and Scarn, and a station master, one by one in the quiet hours. And she had learned to recognize the exact moment when a warrior's face stopped being the face of a warrior and became, briefly, the face of prey remembering an older arrangement. "You'll fight her tomorrow," Vale said. It was not a question. "The contract is signed." "Contracts?" Vale made the oral sound of dismissal, a click of 2 throat membranes. "I have filed 10,000 contracts. I have filed the death notices that came after a great many of them. A contract is a story 2 parties agree to tell before they know the ending." She reached out with one long hand and reclaimed the reader, and shut it, and the archive light glinted off the sealed drawer where the human's true catalog would go back to sleeping, unread, beneath the convenient summary. "Let me tell you the ending of this one, mercenary, so you have the night to make your peace with it. Tomorrow, you will walk into that ring in front of the whole college. You will be the largest and most dangerous thing in it by every measure the college owns. And you will lose, not because she is stronger, she is not. Because you will be trying to win a contest, and she will be doing something else entirely, something her people have been doing since before they had a word for it, and the 2 of you will not be playing the same game, and hers is older." "And what," Gareth said, "is her game?" The old archivist considered him a long moment with her ruined eyes. "She is not going to defeat you," Vale said. "She is going to solve you, the way water solves a wall. She will study the shape of you, and she will find the one direction you cannot brace, and she will put all of her small weight there, and you will fold, and it will not be personal. And that is the part your kind can never forgive, not that she beats you, but that when she is done she will not even hate you. She will look at you the way she looks at a broken instrument, with interest, and then she will set you down and go and find something to eat." Vale turned back to her drawers. 9 kills, they say, on 9 worlds. You have been afraid, mercenary, whatever you tell the young ones. Everyone has been afraid, but you have never once been irrelevant. Sleep on that. It's a new thing. It's the thing she'll show you before the end. Gareth's son did not sleep. He sat in the champion's quarters the Combine had bought him, and he cleaned his grown armor, scar by scar, as he had before 9 kills. And for the first time in his life, the ritual gave him nothing back, because a warrior sharpens himself against the whetstone of an enemy who wants what he wants: victory, honor, survival. And he understood now, with the old archivist's voice in his skull, that the thing across the ring tomorrow would want none of those and could not therefore be sharpened against. Before dawn he rose and went down to the great South Dome alone, to walk the ring in the dark before the college filled it, and he was not alone. The human was there. She was sitting on the edge of the ring with her boots in the sand, exactly as the young Sethful had described her, and she was eating some dense pressed field ration, not a wafer this time, a different thing, and Gareth noted with a lurch that she varied even that she was a creature of small, ordinary changing habits and not a story that repeated, and she looked up at the enormous plated shape of her opponent crossing the dark sand toward her, and she did not stand, and she did not tense, and she said, "Around a mouthful of ration, in the trade can of the Reach." "You read it, the real one, I can tell," she swallowed. "The others didn't until it was too late to matter. You did it the night before." "That's more than the boy managed." She looked at him, and her ordinary brown eyes held nothing he could use, no fear to feed on, no rage to redirect, no pride to lever. "You don't have to. The contract says demonstration. You can lose slow and honest and walk off the moon with your fee and your hide, and I'll make it look like a real contest because you came early and read the file, and that's the only kind of respect I've got to give anybody in this place." She took another bite. "Or you can try to end it, and then it stops being a demonstration and I stop being polite, and neither of us gets to choose how far it goes after that. Your call. I don't mind either way. But you should decide before the doors open, because once they're open I'm going to be busy." Gareth's son, who had killed on 9 worlds and never once been irrelevant, stood in the dark of the ring and looked down at a small human eating breakfast, and made his choice, and it was not the choice the Combine had paid 3 brokers to buy. "I'm going to try to kill you," Gareth's son told her when the doors of the South Dome opened and the college poured in. "Not because they paid me, because a demonstration would be the insult, and you deserve better than an insult, and the only honest thing I have left to give you is everything." Wren Calloway finished the last of her ration, folded the wrapper and put it in her pocket. "Good," she said. "Then we understand each other." She stood and rolled her shoulders once, and Gareth saw her change, not into a warrior exactly, but into a fuller version of the stillness she wore, the way a river narrows and deepens and speeds up without any part of it seeming to hurry. "Don't hold back for the crowd. It's worse if you hold back. I have to work harder to make holding back look like a fight, and working harder means I make mistakes, and mistakes are how people get hurt who didn't need to." She looked up at him, all the way up, and there was, at last, something in her face that was almost warmth, the professional regard of one competent thing for another. "Come at me like the file's real." "It is." The college filled every tier of the great South Dome, and the flat white daylight came down through the high panels, and the warden sat in the examiner's box with her 4 hands still, and beside her the gray-crested Combine observer sat with 3 more of his house who had arrived overnight, and beside them, splinted and silent, sat Draska Vok, who had asked to watch and been permitted, and who was the only Sethful in the dome not hoping the human would fall. Gareth's son walked to the center of the ring, and the human walked to meet him, and she looked, against the mass of him, like something a strong wind might take. The head station master raised his baton. The dome went silent, the specific silence Carroll had been learning for 9 days now, the silence of a warrior culture watching the floor of its certainty, and not knowing how far the fall went. The baton dropped. Gareth came at her the way he had come at 9 problems on 9 worlds, not the showy Terrace arc that had betrayed Draska Vok, but the real thing, the killing thing, low and driving and committed, his full-plated mass behind a strike meant to take her off her feet, and onto the sand where the hornspurs along his forearms would finish it before she could rise. It was a strike that had never failed him. It was faster than anything at Carroll could match. He put his life's whole discipline behind it and meant every ounce, because she had asked him to, and because she was right that the asking was a mercy. She was not there. He had watched the file, the gauntlet recordings, twice through in the champion's quarters. He had thought he understood how she moved. He had understood nothing. The recordings were flat, the real thing was not. She read his commitment in the first fraction of the strike. Not his motion, Gareth realized in the long, slow clarity that fear opens up, but his intent, the instant his weight crossed the line past which he could no longer choose to stop, and she moved on that instant inside it, the way she had gone under Draska's stave, low and close, and into the one place his driving mass could not turn, so that all the killing force he had spent his life perfecting went past her into empty sand and kept going. Because that was the nature of a committed strike, it could not be recalled, and she had not blocked it or countered it or opposed it in any way. She had simply declined to occupy the future he had aimed at. And then she was against his side, inside his reach where his mass meant nothing, one small hand finding the gap in the grown armor at the shoulder joint, where 60 years of a wren's growth left the horn thin over the actuating tendon. And Gareth felt her whole weight drop through that single point with the cold, patient certainty the old archivist had promised, water finding the one direction he could not brace. And his arm, his striking arm, the arm 9 worlds had learned to fear, stopped answering him. It did not break. That was the thing that undid him. She could have broken it. He felt in the mechanics of her grip that breaking it was the easier option, right there, a hand's width more pressure. And she chose the harder thing, the precise thing, the merciful thing, and only stopped the tendon, laid the arm down out of the fight without ruining it, because a ruined arm was waste and she did not waste. She was, even now, even in the killing exchange he had spent all night dreading, doing maintenance. ending only what needed to end, preserving what could be preserved. Reading him, the way Vale had said, the way Tesh read an engine, and taking off the board exactly the part that made him a threat and not one part more. He roared and turned into her with everything left, his good arm, his mass, the horn spurs, the whole weight of the ash steps, and she went with the turn instead of against it, took the momentum he gave her and added her own small measure to it and steered it, so that Gareth's son, champion of 9 worlds, spun himself off his own feet using force he had generated, and the sand of the ring came up to meet him, and her weight settled onto the back of his neck, one knee, precise, controlling, not crushing. And her voice came down to him quiet and level, and entirely without triumph, the voice of someone reading out a diagnosis. "That's the fight," Ren said. "You're done. Your arm's off for a few days, not forever. If you get up, I take the knee too, and then it's a real injury, and I don't want to and you don't want me to. So stay down and we'll both call it honest, because it was." A pause. He felt her weight ease, the knee lift, the terrible patient pressure withdraw. "You came early and read the file. You told me the truth before you tried to kill me. Out of everyone on this moon, you're the only one who did both. So I'm going to stand up now, and I'm going to help you up after, and you're going to walk off this moon with your fee and your name. And when they ask you what happened, you're going to tell them exactly what I am, because they'll believe you when they wouldn't believe the paper." She stood. The dome had made no sound through any of it. The whole thing had taken the time it takes to set down a heavy load, no more, and now, as the small human straightened over the largest warrior any of them had ever seen, and then bent, and took his good arm and braced her small weight to help the plated mass of Gareth's son back onto his feet, the silence changed its character. It stopped being the silence of a crowd watching a contest. It became the silence of a room full of predators recognizing, all at once and too late, which one of them had been the predator all along. Gareth got his feet under him with the human's help. He was a head and a half taller than her and 8 times her mass, and his best arm hung dead at his side. And he stood in the center of the ring in the flat white daylight and looked down at Ren Calloway. And then he did the thing that no coin could have bought and no contract had specified. The thing that finished the Combine story more completely than any injury could have. He knelt. Not in defeat. A defeated warrior lies where he falls. He knelt the way the Wren knelt on the ash steps to a thing that had beaten them cleanly and spared them without contempt, lowering his great horned head until it was, for the first and last time in his life, below the head of the creature across from him. And he spoke, in trade cant, loudly enough for the whole dome to hear, the words his people gave to exactly one thing in a lifetime if they were lucky enough to meet it and unlucky enough to survive. "I name you the stronger," Gareth's son said. "Before the college and the houses and my own dead, I name you the stronger, and I will carry it to the steps, and my people will know your kind by name, and no Wren will ever again lift a hand against a human for pay, because there is not enough coin under any sun to make a warrior fight the tide." He rose. He looked up at the examiner's box, at the gray-crested Combine observers who had bought him, and his molten yellow eyes had gone cold with something that was very close to disgust. "You hired me to close a wound. There is no wound. There is only a truth you have been paying people to help you not see. I am the 9th warrior you have thrown at her, and I am the first to walk away, and I am walking away because I read a file you ordered sealed." He turned and started out of the ring, and stopped, and delivered to the whole silent college the line that Skarn would carry to the end of his own 40 years. "You keep sending your strongest to prove she is soft. Every time she keeps your strongest. At some point, houses of the Reach, you have to ask what she is collecting them for." And he walked out of the South Dome, champion of 9 worlds, arm dead at his side, head unbowed to everyone in that dome except the small human eating nothing, now behind him, and the doors closed on him, and Carol sat in the flat daylight with the question he had left hanging over the sand. What was she collecting them for? Ren Calloway did not answer it. She walked to the edge of the ring, sat down, took the folded ration wrapper out of her pocket, looked into it to see if there was anything left, found nothing, and folded it up again. Then she looked up at the examiner's box, at the warden, at the Combine's gray-crested men, at Draska Vox splinted and staring. And she spoke for the first time to all of them at once, and her voice was not raised, and it did not need to be, because a dome that has learned to be that silent will carry a whisper to its highest tier. "I didn't come here to collect anybody," she said. "I came because a treaty said I should, and my people keep treaties even when the other side signs them as a joke. I've kept your gauntlet's respect and your champion's word and 6 terrace knives I didn't ask for, and I'd give all of it back tomorrow for one person on this moon to stop trying to figure out how to make me smaller." She stood and brushed the sand off, an ordinary small tired person at the end of a long shift. "I'm not the tide. The tide doesn't care about you. I do a little, which is the only reason any of you are still walking. Don't waste it." She left the ring the way she left everything, without hurry and without a backward look. And behind her the warden of Carold sat with all 4 hands open in her lap, and understood that she had, over 9 days, been given a gift, and had spent every one of those days trying to return it unopened, and that the gift was still there, waiting, and would not wait forever. The Combine's gray-crested observer rose. He did not bow this time. He looked at the empty mouth of the ring where the human had gone, and then at the warden, and he said, in the cold formal cant of the terrace houses, the words that set the last movement turning. "The houses withdraw their grievance." A pause, and beneath the formality, something that was almost fear. "And the houses will require the college to determine before this creature's exchange ends whether she is a guest or a garrison, because we no longer believe those are the same question, and we would rather know now in daylight than learn it later in the dark." Old Vale, the archivist, kept the record of Carold, and in the days after the champion knelt, she found herself keeping a private one as well, unfiled in the back of her ruined eyes, because she had lived through 11 wardens and 30 Combine visitations and 1 small human, and only one of those had made her open a drawer she had been ordered to keep sealed. She had watched them come to the archive one by one in the quiet hours to read the true file, the warden, the master instructor, the mercenary, a station master, even once, a frightened third-form Sethful with a splinted arm who had stood at her counter and asked, in a voice that had not yet decided what it wanted to become, whether the paper about the human's world was true. Vale had shown them all the same entry, the saturated scale and the reverse predations and the survey team's slow collapse into disbelief, and she had watched the same thing happen to each of their faces, and she had a name for it now, a filing category of her own invention that appeared in no official taxonomy. She called it the correction. It was the moment a creature raised to believe itself dangerous met the record of a thing that made danger look like a childhood, and revised, not its opinion. Opinions were cheap, but the deep pre-thinking floor beneath the opinion, the animal certainty about where one stood in the order of the world. Vale had spent 60 years watching cadets arrive certain and leave slightly less so. That was what a warcollege was for, the slow sanding down of the young. But the correction was not slow. It happened in the time it took to read a page, and it did not sand a cadet down toward humility by degrees. It moved the floor all at once, and left them standing on it, blinking, in a world that had grown 1 story taller beneath them while they read. The warden had taken the correction hardest, because the warden had the most certainty to lose. The mercenary had taken it best, because a creature that kills for pay on 9 worlds has already made its peace with being outmatched somewhere, and had only needed to learn that the somewhere had a name and had sent it breakfast. The frightened Sethful boy had taken it strangest of all, had read the entry twice, slowly, and then looked up at Vale not with fear but with a terrible dawning relief, as if the paper had explained something to him about his own broken arm that he had needed badly to have explained, and could not have borne to hear from a living mouth. Vale filed them all in the private record behind her eyes, and she added, in the days after the champion, a line of her own, the archivist's line, the one that never went in any official entry because official entries do not permit their keepers to be moved. They keep coming to read what she is, Vale wrote, in the place where no one would ever read it, and they leave understanding what they are. That is the only true function of the file. It was never about the human at all. It is a mirror we ordered sealed because we did not want to see the size of the room we have been standing in, mistaking the walls for the edge of the world. She has done nothing to us in a season but stand in the middle of that room and decline to break, and the standing has shown every one of us exactly how much space there is between what we believed ourselves to be and what a truly hard world grows. That is not an insult. It is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for this college. She has let us measure ourselves against her and survive the measuring. Almost nothing in the reach gets to do that. We should have offered tea on the first morning. We offered a stick instead. The wonder is not that she broke the boy who lifted it. The wonder is that she has broken nothing else. That a thing which could have corrected us the fast way chose for a whole season to correct us the slow one, and let us keep our arms and our cadets and our pride, spending only the one currency she had and we did not, patience. Log it where it will not be sealed. Some corrections are a kindness. This one was the largest kindness the college has ever been shown, and it arrived as the largest kindnesses do, disguised as the smallest thing in the room. Guest or garrison? The warden turned the Combine's question over for 3 days and could not set it down, and on the 3rd day she sent for the human, and the human came with grease on her knuckles and sat across the wide daylit desk and waited, and HFYStories found that she did not know how to begin. The houses want me to determine what you are, the warden said at last. I know what I am, Wren said. The trouble was never me not knowing. It was all of you needing me to be something small enough to fit in a story you'd already written. She glanced around the office at the glass, at the flat white light. You didn't call me up here to ask what I am. You know, you've known since the archivist opened the real file she told me you'd read it. You called me up here because you're the warden of a warcollege, and you just found out you're running a fortress that a single 17-year-old could take apart if she woke up one morning and decided to, and that's a hard thing to keep in your head and still give orders. I get it. I'll make it easy. She leaned forward, forearms on the desk, ordinary and small and entirely calm. I'm a guest. I'm going to stay a guest. I'll finish the exchange, I'll go home, and I'll never once do the thing you're all afraid I'll do, because my people don't take fortresses from people who signed a treaty with us, even people who signed it as a joke. That's not weakness. That's the discipline. It's the only thing that makes what I can do survivable to have around. And if I do not believe you, then you're exactly as smart as the boy with the stick, Wren said without heat, and we've already seen how that goes. Believe me or don't, warden. It doesn't change what I do. It only changes whether you sleep. HFYStories was quiet a long moment. Then she asked the question she had been circling for 9 days, the real one, the one under the Combine's question and her own. Why did you let it get so far? The boy, the knives in the dark, my gauntlet, the champion, any of it. You could have ended the first morning by simply being what you are from the start, standing in the doorway on the first day and letting them see. It would have cost no one an arm. Why let them keep coming? Why let it build? And Wren Calloway looked at the warden with the old weariness that Scarn had glimpsed once in the maintenance bay, and gave her the answer that HFYStories would think about for the rest of her command. Because a thing you're shown once, you explain away, Wren said. A thing that keeps happening, you finally believe. If I'd broken the boy on the first day, you'd have called it a fluke and sent me home, and the next human who came through on the next treaty would have walked into the exact same wall of certainty, and maybe that one wouldn't have been as patient as me, and maybe she'd have taught the lesson the fast way, the way my people can teach it, and then there'd be no college left to send cadets to. She stood. I let it build because building it was the only way to make it stick. You needed 9 tries to believe your eyes. I gave you 9. That's not mercy for me. That's mercy for the next one of us you meet, and for you, so that when you meet her you'll have the sense to offer tea instead of a stick. Consider it done, Warden. The lesson's paid for. Try not to make me buy it twice." She left. Ilex Gorin sat alone in the daylight for a long time, and then she did the first wise thing she had done in 9 days. She opened her instruments, and she began, quietly, to draft a report to the Conquered that told the truth. That the exchange had not sent Carol a charity case, that it had sent a courtesy, a single ambassador of restraint from a people who could have sent something else, and that the college would be wise, going forward, to treat the courtesy as the warning it was. She never finished the report, because on the 9th night after the champion knelt, the containment on the cull failed, and the college learned the truth the fast way after all. The cull was Carol's oldest cruelty, and its most closely kept. In the lowest level of the college, beneath the maintenance bays, behind blast doors that had not been opened in a season, the college kept a live apex predator for the final trial of the third form. A marrowcat, they called it, taken as a cub from the killing forests of a HFY world, and grown for 11 years into 2,000 pounds of ambush and appetite. In the final trial, third form cadets entered the cull's chamber in graded groups and survived it or did not, and the ones who did not were the reason the college's true mortality numbers never appeared in any prospectus. The marrowcat had killed 41 cadets in its 11 years. It was the college's proof that Carol produced warriors and not certificate holders. It was also, and this was the part the warrior masters never troubled themselves with, a living thing kept alive by machines, and the machines were kept alive by the maintenance caste, and the maintenance caste at Carol was the neth, and the neth were the pipes in the wall. Wren had found the breach on her second day. She had told Tesh the coolant filter was failing upstream. Tesh had filed a work order. The work order had gone to the facility's master, a Sethful of no particular house who regarded the neth's endless technical anxieties as beneath a warrior's notice, and the facility's master had marked it low priority, because the failing loop did not cool a training hall or a dormitory or anything a cadet would sit in, and no cadet would sit in the thing it cooled, and so it did not matter. The thing it cooled was the containment field on the cull. The marrowcat's chamber was held not by bars. Nothing the college owned would hold 2,000 pounds of HFY ambush behind bars, but by a suppression field, a lattice of directed cold that kept the beast in a torpor deep enough to handle and shallow enough to wake for the trial. The field ran hot. It always ran hot, that was its nature. It was cooled by a dedicated loop, and the loop's filter had been breaching for 11 days. And the breach had been marked low priority by a warrior who did not respect the technical caste. And on the 9th night after the champion knelt, in the small hours, the loop clogged with silicate grit exactly as the human had said it would in 40 days, except that it had already been failing for 11. And so it was not 40 days, it was that night, and the suppression field spiked, and browned and failed. And in the deep cold torpor of its chamber, for the first time in 11 years, the marrowcat woke all the way up, hungry in the dark, beneath a sleeping college that had spent 9 days learning to fear the wrong predator. Asa was the first to know, because Asa was Neth, and the Neth kept the boards, and even a second-form technical cadet stood a watch on the monitoring station in the small hours because the warriors would not. She was half asleep at the board when the containment telltale went from amber to a red she had never seen lit, and then to no color at all, which was worse, because a sensor reads nothing only when there is nothing left to read it with. Her skin blazed wound red in the dark of the monitoring closet. She understood in one horrible instant exactly what had failed and exactly what was now awake below, and she understood that the alarm protocol would route to the facility's master, the same Sethful who had marked the work order low priority, and that by the time a warrior culture that despised maintenance grasped what its contempt had loosed, the thing would be up the access shafts and into the dormitory levels where 400 cadets slept. Asa did not call the facility's master. She ran, glowing, terrified, on her soft legs through the blue-lit corridors of the sleeping college, 3 levels up, to the transient row, to the one bunk apart from the others. And she did the bravest thing her small, useless body had ever done, which was to keep running toward the danger instead of away from it. And she reached the human's bunk and found, as she had known she would, that the human was already awake, already sitting up, already reading the wrongness in the air the way she read everything. And Asa gasped out the words in the trade can she had practiced in her head the whole terrified way there. The cull, the field's down, it's awake. The loop, the breach you found, it clogged. It's awake, it's loose. And they'll route it to the master, and the master won't understand in time. And Wren Calloway was already on her feet, already pulling on her boots, already reaching under the bunk for the wrapped cloth where she kept the 6 terrace knives she had taken and cleaned and studied. And her face, in the blue safety light, was doing the still thing, the water-going still thing. The thing Scarn had seen across the ring on the first morning and named, wrongly, as calm. It was not calm. Asa was close enough now and had known her long enough now to see what it truly was. It was the face of a predator from a heronine world learning that there was, at last, on this soft graded moon full of things that only played at being dangerous, one real thing awake in the dark. And the human looked something almost like relieved. "Where are the access shafts?" Wren said, unwrapping the knives, choosing 2, testing their weight the way she tested everything. "And which way is the dormitory level from the cull?" And Asa, she looked up, and put one hand for a moment on the small, glowing shoulder of the only creature at Carroll who had run toward her instead of at her. "You did the right thing coming to me. Now you're going to do one more right thing. You're going to wake the boards and sound the true alarm, the real one, not the warrior one, get the maintenance cast to the blast doors, seal the upshafts you can seal, and keep everyone you can behind cold iron. Buy me corridors. I'll take the rest." She stood, 2 terrace knives in her hands, small and ordinary and no longer pretending to be furniture. "Go." Asa went. And Wren Calloway walked down toward the lowest level of the sleeping college, alone, unhurried, toward the one thing on the moon that had never once underestimated her, because it had never been told she was harmless, because it was a predator and predators do not read files. And for the first time in 9 days, the human moved through Carroll like something that had finally, after all this patience, found a use for what it was. Scarn woke to the wrong alarm. 40 years at Carroll had taught him the college's sounds the way a man knows the breathing of his own house, and the sound tearing through the corridors at that hour was not the muster horn or the drill klaxon. It was the deep 3-note fault tone the Neth used among themselves, the one the warrior masters had never bothered to learn, and Scarn had learned it precisely because no one else would, and so he was on his feet and moving before the meaning of it fully surfaced, and when it surfaced he stopped cold in his own doorway. Containment fault, lowest level the cull. He had argued against the Marrowcat for 11 years and lost, and he had signed the maintenance concerns himself, session after session, and watched them marked low priority by masters who thought a warcollege too proud to be killed by its own plumbing. He knew, in the space of one breath, exactly what had happened and exactly whose contempt had done it. And he knew that the beast was awake and loose beneath 400 sleeping cadets, and he ran. The corridors were already chaos, not the ordered chaos of a drill, the other kind, the kind a warrior culture never trains for because it cannot imagine needing to. Cadets who had spent their whole lives certain they were the most dangerous thing in any room were spilling from the dormitories in the blue half-light, and they had no formation and no orders and no idea, because the thing loose below them was not an opponent they could challenge or a grade they could pass. It was appetite. It did not care about their houses or their bloodlines or their crests. And some deep pre-warrior part of every one of them knew it, and that part was screaming, and it was winning. Scarn saw a knot of third-form Sethful, the pride of the terraces, boys who had cleared the gauntlet frozen at a corridor junction, staring down the upshaft grill from which a sound was coming, a low, wet sawing rumble that Skarn had heard only once, 11 years ago, when the cub had first been brought in, and had never wanted to hear again. One of the boys had a training blade. It shook in his hand. The marrowcat was in the shaft below the grill, and it was climbing, and the boys who had been bred for 4 generations to be unafraid of anything could not make their legs carry them either toward it or away. "Move," Skarn roared, and 40 years of command broke the freeze enough to scatter them, up corridor away, and he put his own body at the grill junction with a fire axe he had torn off the wall, an old master instructor with a hand tool against 2,000 pounds of Harrow 6 ambush. And he knew it was not enough, and he set himself anyway, because that was the last thing 40 years had left him. And then the human went past him. She came down the corridor from the up levels the way water finds a drain, fast and low, and without any wasted motion, 2 terrace knives loose in her hands, and she did not stop at the grill junction where Skarn had made his stand. She glanced at him, one flat assessing glance, the same glance she gave a broken instrument, and she said, not slowing, "Axe is right. Junction's wrong. It won't come up a grill it can hear you at. It'll come up the maintenance shaft 2 corridors over, the quiet one, behind the cadets you just sent running." And she was already gone, past him, toward the quiet shaft, toward the 400 fleeing cadets she had just diagnosed as bait, and Skarn understood with a lurch of shame that she had read the beast's hunt in the space of one breath of listening, and he, in 40 years, had set himself at the wrong door. He went after her. He was not fast enough to keep up, and he went anyway. By the time he reached the second junction, the thing had already happened, or the first part of it had. The maintenance shaft cover lay peeled back like foil. A third form cadet, an oral command track, one of the loners from the transient row, lay against the wall with all 4 arms clutched to a torso opened by a single raking blow, alive, gasping, but out of the fight and bleeding fast. And standing over him between the wounded oral and the thing that had come up the quiet shaft was the human, and the marrowcat was in the corridor. Skarn had forgotten how large it was. 11 years of growth on a diet of graded cadets had made it a nightmare in the blue light, long as a transit car, low and heavy through the shoulders, its hide the mottled dark of the killing forests, its eyes the wide flat gold of a thing that hunts by committing utterly and never misses. It had killed 41 warriors of graded worlds. It filled the corridor. It looked at the small human between it and its wounded prey, and it did the thing that told Skarn more than anything what it was. It did not roar, it did not rear, it did not perform. It lowered itself and went silent and began, with the terrible economy of a true apex, to stalk. And Wren Calloway lowered herself too and went silent too, and Skarn watched the 2 of them settle into the same stillness, the exact same predator's stillness, the small biped and the 2,000-pound killer mirroring one another in the blue-lit corridor, and he understood that he was, for the first time in his life, watching 2 things of the same kind meet. "Master Instructor," Wren said without turning, her voice barely above the beast's silence. "The oral behind me is bleeding out. That's the actual emergency. I've got this corridor. Get him to the neth at the blast doors. Oss'll have a medic. Don't run. It reads running as prey. Walk backward, keep your axe up, move slow, take him now while it's looking at me. A beat. It's going to keep looking at me. I'm more interesting." Skarn did not argue. He had spent 9 days learning not to argue with the human, and the lesson chose that moment to finish. He moved to the wounded oral, slow, axe up, and got a shoulder under the 4-armed cadet and took his weight, and began the long, slow backward walk up the corridor, and the marrowcat's flat gold eyes flicked to the motion once. Skarn's heart stopped, and then returned to the human, because she had already stepped a half-pace to keep herself the nearer, the more interesting, the deliberate lure, drawing the apex's whole attention onto the one target in the corridor that had chosen to be there. The last thing Skarn saw, before the curve of the corridor took it from him, was the small human and the enormous beast, both perfectly still, both perfectly silent, settling in to solve one another in the dark under the sleeping college. And the human's ordinary face, lit blue, wearing an expression he had spent 9 days failing to name, and finally, carrying a bleeding cadet up a corridor away from a monster, named correctly at last. It was not calm. It had never been calm. It was recognition. The human had come to a moon full of things that played at being dangerous, and been prodded and tested and hunted by children who mistook their own strength for the top of the world. And through all of it, she had worn the patience of someone waiting in a foreign country for one word of her own language to be spoken. And now, at last, in the lowest corridor of Carold, something had spoken it. The Marrowcat was the first thing on the moon that had never underestimated her. That could not, being a beast, be taught to. And she had gone down to meet it not with dread but with the quiet, terrible relief of a creature that has finally, after so long being the only predator in every room, found another one, and can at last stop pretending to be furniture. Skarn carried the wounded Oral up into the light, and behind him the corridor stayed silent, and he prayed to the deep pre-warrior thing in his own brain, the thing that remembered the mud tides, and he found that he was not praying for the human. He was praying for the beast, that it would be quick about dying, so that it would not have to learn the slow way, what the whole college had spent 9 days learning, that the small quiet thing across the dark from it was not its prey, had never been anyone's prey, and had come down the shaft with 2 borrowed knives and an old patience to remind the only real predator on Carold which world had earned the number at the end of the scale. Draska Vok went down into the dark against every order, with one arm still splinted to his chest, and a terrace knife he was not permitted to carry in his good hand, because he had lain in his bunk listening to the college scream, and understood that if he stayed there he would be, for the rest of his life, the warrior of the terraces who hid, while an animal from a soft world went down to fight the real thing. He had no illusion that he could help. He had learned, over 40 days of splinted humiliation, exactly how far the distance ran between what he had believed himself to be and what he was. He went anyway, down the upshafts against the flow of fleeing cadets, toward the sawing rumble, because the only thing worse than dying to the Marrowcat was living as the boy who let her die alone, and somewhere in the 40 days that thought had become the truest thing he owned. He found them in the long maintenance corridor beneath the coolant bays, and he stopped at the corner and did not go closer, because he understood at once that going closer would kill him and, worse, would distract her. The human and the beast were still circling. It had been, Draska guessed, only minutes, but they had already learned each other the way 2 duelists never do, the Marrowcat testing her with small feints, quarter lunges it pulled back from, reading how she read it, the human giving ground in a slow, controlled spiral, back down the corridor, deeper, away from the shafts and the cadets and the light, toward the coolant bays, and Draska realized with a cold lurch that she was not retreating. She was leading. She had picked the ground the way she picked everything, and she was walking the largest predator on the moon backward into a room of her own choosing. And the beast, being an apex, being certain, being a thing that had killed 41 warriors and never once been prey, followed her into it because it could not conceive that the small thing ahead of it was choosing anything at all. The coolant bay was a forest of pipes and condensers in the blue dark, half of it slick with the frost of the very loops that had failed, and the floor ran with the meltwater of a suppression field that no longer suppressed. The human backed into it and let the beast come, and Draska, at the door, saw her do a thing he did not understand until it was over. She reached out, in passing, without looking, and turned a valve. Then the Marrowcat committed. It had been waiting, as apex hunters wait, for the ground where the prey's escape narrowed, and the coolant bay was that ground, walls close, footing bad, nowhere left to spiral, and it read the closing walls as the end of the hunt and launched itself down the length of the bay with the full 2,000 pounds of it behind a strike that had ended 41 warriors, low and flat and faster than anything that size had any right to be, straight at the small thing it had finally cornered. And the small thing was not cornered. The small thing had turned a valve. The loop she had opened dumped its charge across the bay floor in the beast's path. Not water, Draska saw, but the volatile coolant itself, the frictionless cryo-fluid the suppression field used, flashing to vapor as it hit the warmer air, and the Marrowcat's committed launch carried it onto a floor that had, in the half-second of its leap, become a sheet of frictionless cold. 2,000 pounds of apex predator hit it mid-stride and lost the ground, all four killing limbs scrabbling on a surface that gave them nothing, its perfect committed strike sliding wide, and long past the place the human had been, into the tangle of condenser pipes at the bay's end, and the human moved. She did not attack the beast's strength. Draska would tell it, in years to come, exactly this way, because it was the only way that was true. She did not fight it at all. She let the coolant take its footing, and she went in behind the slide, up onto the beast's back where its own bulk could not turn to reach her, one small hand fisting into the mottled hide at the base of the skull, and she put both Terrace knives, the ancestral blades of his own house, the blades 6 warriors had drawn to kill her in the dark, and she had kept and cleaned and studied until she knew them better than the house that forged them, into the one place on 2,000 pounds of Harrow 6 ambush that 2,000 pounds cannot armor, the soft hinge behind the jaw where the skull meets the spine, driven in and turned with the same cold economy she had used on a training stave and a champion's shoulder. The whole of her small weight dropping through the one direction the beast could not brace. The Marrowcat convulsed. It was not quick. That was the part Draska had not been ready for, the part that separated the human from every warrior story he had ever been raised on, that killing the real thing was not clean and was not fast and cost her, visibly, terribly. The beast threw itself against the condensers with her on its back, and a scything hind claw caught her across the thigh and opened it to the bone, and she did not cry out. She set her jaw and rode it and kept her weight down through the knives, and the bay filled with the wreck of it, pipes bursting, cryofog rolling white in the blue light, the largest predator on the moon dying hard against the machines that had kept it sleeping, and the small human bleeding freely down a ruined leg and refusing, with a patience that was its own kind of violence, to let go one instant before the thing was done. It was done. The beast's great flat gold eyes fixed, and its scrabbling stilled, and its 2,000 pounds settled to the frost-slick floor with a long exhalation of steam, and Wren Calloway stayed on its back a moment longer than she needed to, waiting, the way you wait on a thing that has surprised you before, making certain, and only then did she draw the knives out and slide down off the ruined mountain of it and put her back against a condenser and slowly, controlled all the way down, the way Tesh lowered a delicate part, lower herself to the floor with her opened leg out in front of her. Draska crossed the bay to her. He did not remember deciding to. He knelt in the meltwater and the cryofog beside the small human who had broken his arm and kept his knives and just killed, alone, at a cost written red down her leg, the thing his whole college had been too proud to maintain and too frightened to face, and he did not know what a warrior of the terraces was supposed to say to that, so he said the only true thing he had. "I came down to help you," Draska said, "and there was nothing I could have done. I understand that now. I understand it completely." Wren looked at him, splinted arm, forbidden knife, terrified eyes, and something in her ordinary bloodied face eased, not into warmth exactly, but into a kind of professional acknowledgement, one creature to another, that had more respect in it than any bow. "You came down," she said. Her breath was short, the leg was bad. She was pressing the heel of her hand into it with the same detached competence she gave a stripped regulator, buying time. "That's the whole thing, Draska. That's the only part that was ever up to you. The rest was always going to be mine, not because I'm brave, because I'm not, I was scared the entire time, but because this is what my world grew me to do, and it grew you to do something else, and there's no shame in that unless you spend your life pretending it isn't so." She winced, adjusted her grip on the wound. "You picked up a stick 9 days ago to make me small." Tonight you picked up a knife you're not allowed to carry and came down into the dark to stand next to me against the one real thing on this moon. Same boy, different choice. That's the only thing any of you were ever going to get to keep from me, not the fight, the choice." Then she looked past him, at the door of the bay where the light was growing, where the sounds of the college were changing from panic into something slower and more careful, and she said, in a voice that had begun, at last, to fray at the edges with the cost of the night, "Get the neth, get Asa, not a warrior medic, a neth. They know the coolant. They'll know how to close a cryo-cut before it takes the leg." A flicker of the old dry patience, even now, even bleeding. "And Draska, tell your facilities master the filter clogged in 9 days, not 40. Tell him the animal was right. He'll remember I said 40. Make sure he remembers who was closer." Asa closed the wound. She had never treated a cryo-cut on living flesh. No neth at Carroll had, because the marrowcat's chamber was the one place the coolant ran cold enough to do this to a body, and no body was ever supposed to be in it. But Asa knew the fluid, knew what it did to tissue and how fast, knew that a warrior medic reaching for heat and pressure would kill the leg trying to save it. And so when Draska's shout brought her running down into the coolant bay, she did not freeze and she did not glow. She worked. She flushed the wound with the neutralizing wash from her own maintenance kit, and packed it the slow, careful neth way, and got the bleeding stopped and the cold arrested, and the leg Skarn heard the medics confirm it later twice, because they could not believe a technical cadet had done it. The leg saved, whole, by the smallest and softest creature in the college, kneeling in cryofog over the one warrior who had ever treated her like she mattered. The college came down to the coolant bay slowly, in the growing light, and it came down silent. They had all felt it, the way the whole institution had lurched awake to the fault tone and the panic, and then, in the small hours, gone still, because word had traveled, the way word always traveled at Carroll, down through the tiers and the dormitories and the mess. The cull was loose, and the human went down to it alone, and the human won. By the time Skarn brought the survivors back to the lowest level, the corridors were lined with cadets who had spent 9 days learning to be afraid of the wrong thing, and one long night learning what the right thing had cost. And not one of them spoke, and not one of them moved to be nearer than the human stillness allowed. And when the litter came up out of the coolant bay bearing the small biped with her ruined thigh packed white, and a neth technical cadet walking beside it holding the fluid line, 200 warriors of 30 proud houses did the thing their bred certainty had spent 9 days refusing to do. They stood aside, and as the litter passed, one by one, without an order given, without a word said, they lowered their heads, Sethful crests dropping, V Harun thoraxes bowing, the four-armed oral folding all their hands, not the salute of a college to a champion which is loud, but the older thing beneath it, the thing a predator does when a greater predator passes and chooses not to notice it. It ran the whole length of the corridor, that silent lowering, a wave of 200 heads going down as the small human went by on her litter, awake, pale, entirely unimpressed, looking up at the ceiling and pressing the heel of her hand absently against the packed wound as if checking a seal. She did not acknowledge it. Skarn walked beside the litter and watched her not acknowledge it, and he understood that the not acknowledging was not contempt and was not modesty. It was that she genuinely did not think what she had done required a response. On her world, he was beginning to grasp. This was Tuesday. On her world, a thing woke up hungry in the dark, and you dealt with it, and you did not expect the neighbors to bow, because the neighbors had dealt with their own things in their own dark. And bowing was what you did for the extraordinary, and there was nothing extraordinary about a human killing a predator. It was the oldest and most ordinary thing her kind had ever done. It was the thing that had made her world what it was. The college was bowing to a woman changing a filter. The facility's master was waiting at the top of the corridor. He was Sethful, unhoused, a middling warrior who had washed into administration the way middling warriors do. And he had marked the work order low priority, and he knew by now that everyone knew it, and he stood at the top of the corridor with the particular stillness of a man watching the consequences of his own contempt arrive on a litter. As the human passed him, he opened his mouth to say what Scarn never learned, an excuse or an apology or nothing worth the air. And Wren Calloway turned her head on the litter and looked at him once. The flat, assessing glance she gave broken instruments, and did not stop the litter, and said only, as she went by, in the exhausted level voice of someone stating a maintenance finding for the record: "Silicate grit, upstream filter. I told the quartermaster on the second day and he filed it and you buried it, because the loop it cooled didn't cool anything a warrior would sit in." The litter carried her on, and she finished it over her shoulder without heat, which was the worst thing about it, that there was no heat in it at all. 41 cadets over 11 years, and it was never the beast that killed them. It was you. It was always going to be you. The beast was just the tool you kept sharp, so you'd never have to look at the thing you left dull. And she was carried on, up into the light, and the facility's master stood in the mouth of the corridor with 200 witnesses who had heard it. And Scarn watched a warrior culture that had spent 9 centuries believing its cadets died gloriously to the cull absorb, all at once, in the flat daylight, the truth that its cadets had died to a clogged filter and a signature marked low priority, and that the small, soft, technical casts it struck for making sounds had been the only thing standing between the college and its own neglect the entire time. The warden met the litter in the infirmary. Ilex Gorin had come down from the spire in the night, and she had seen the coolant bay, and she had seen the beast, 2,000 pounds of it, cold on the frost-slick floor, killed with 2 borrowed knives and a turned valve, and a cost written down a young leg, and she had stood over it a long time with all 4 of her hands still. Now she stood at the foot of the infirmary cot where the medics worked on the human's leg, confirming Osa's work, unable to improve it, and she looked at Wren Calloway, and the Border Fleet commander who had spent 9 days trying to return an unopened gift finally opened it. "I ran you through my hardest instrument to prove you were soft," Ilex Gorin said. "I let the Combine buy a champion to break you. I signed the maintenance concerns and marked the beast's containment someone else's problem. Every choice I made for 9 days was a choice to make you smaller, and every one of them failed, and the last one nearly killed 400 of my cadets, and would have, if a Neth had not run the wrong way and a human had not gone down a shaft with 2 knives. She took off the boys who tried to murder her in her sleep." The warden lowered herself slowly until her eyes were level with the humans, which no oral of her rank did for anyone. "I do not know how to command a fortress that contains you. I have stopped trying. I have one thing left to ask, and it is not a warden's question. It is an old soldier's, and you have earned an honest one, so I will ask it plainly. What are we to you? Your people, when you look at us, at all our houses and our grades and our proud-bred certainty, what do you see? Prey you have chosen not to take, children you are humoring. What?" Wren Calloway was quiet a moment. The medics had stopped working, and the infirmary had gone still, and the question hung in the flat morning light coming through the high windows, and Scarn, standing at the door, found he had stopped breathing for the answer. "Neighbors," the human said finally. "That's all. Loud neighbors on a soft street who never had to learn to be quiet, because nothing on your street ever came in the dark and made you learn. You look at us and see something small, and you think small means beneath. We look at you and see something loud, and we think loud means safe, means you grew up somewhere that let you be loud, somewhere that didn't teach you the thing our world taught us before we had words for it." She shifted on the cot, easing the leg. "I don't see prey, Warden. I've never seen prey when I look at you. I see the luckiest people in the reach. You got to grow up believing you were the most dangerous thing in the world. Most of us never got to believe that for a single day. And I came here on a treaty my people keep even as a joke, and I let a boy break my breakfast and 6 knives come at me in the dark, and your instrument and your champion and your beast, and I kept every bit of it patient and quiet and small, for you. Because the alternative to a quiet human is not a loud human. It's a quiet street, and I would rather be underestimated on a loud street for the rest of my life than teach you, even once, why our street is so quiet. The college did not go back to what it had been. Institutions rarely do, once they have been shown the floor of their own certainty and found it thinner than they believed. The call was ended. HFYStories signed the order herself, before the human was even out of the infirmary, and she did not soften it or root it or mark it for later review. She signed it and had the chamber sealed, and the machines that had kept a nightmare sleeping for 11 years shut down for good. And when the conservative masters came to argue that the final trial was the college's proof of seriousness, the warden let them finish and then asked them a single question. The one Gareth's son had left hanging over the ring, turned now against Carol's own reflection. Whether a college that could only prove its warriors by feeding them to a beast it was too proud to maintain had ever been proving anything at all, or only performing a cruelty it had mistaken for rigor because the cruelty flattered its self-regard. The masters did not have an answer. The masters had never had an answer. They had only had a beast, and the beast was cold on a coolant bay floor, killed by the one cadet the college had tried hardest to break. And the Neth stopped being the pipes in the wall. That change came quietly and it came fast, and Scarn, who had watched Carol for 40 years and thought he knew every current in it, was not prepared for how fast. It began the morning after the coolant bay, when a third-form Sethful, one of the boys Scarn had scattered from the wrong grill, walked into the maintenance bay where Asa was recalibrating a monitoring board and stood in the doorway. And Asa's skin began to light with the old involuntary terror, and the Sethful did not strike her for it. He asked her, in halting careful trade cant, to teach him the fault tones. All of them. The three-note containment fault and the others. The whole vocabulary of the boards that the warrior masters had spent 9 centuries refusing to learn, because learning it meant admitting that the soft technical castes held the college's life in their soft hands. He asked, and Asa, glowing, astonished, taught him. And by the turning of the season half the third form could read a board, and the fault tones were part of the drill curriculum, and the work orders filed by the Neth no longer went to a facilities master to be buried, but to a review the warden read herself. And Carol, without anyone quite announcing it, became a college that understood the difference between the thing that plays at being dangerous and the thing that quietly keeps you alive. The facilities master was not disciplined. HFYStories considered it and chose something colder and more exact. She reassigned him permanently to the maintenance caste under Tesh, to learn from the Neth the trade whose importance his contempt had nearly cost 400 lives, and to file, personally, every low-priority work order in the college, and to answer for each one. It was, the cadets said, the cruelest sentence the warden had ever handed down, and it was also the fairest, and both things were true, and the human, when Scarn told her of it, sitting by her cot in the long, slow days of her leg healing, had only nodded and said that it was the right call, because the man was not evil. He was merely raised to believe that some kinds of care were beneath a warrior. And the only cure for that belief was to spend the rest of your life doing the care, and finding out it was harder than the fighting. The Combine's gray-crested observer went home and told the terrace houses what he had seen, and what he had seen had been enough, and the houses did the thing proud cultures do when they finally meet the tide. They made a virtue of it. Within a year there was a saying on the Sethful terraces, Scarn heard it from a new intake 2 seasons later, that had passed into the language the way true things do, unattributed, worn smooth. You do not lift a stick to the quiet ones. It was told to terrace children as a proverb about humility, and none of them knew it had a source, and the source was a boy named Draska Vok who had lifted a stick to a quiet one and spent 40 days learning why you don't, and who had come down into the dark anyway, at the end, with a knife he was not allowed to carry, and made a different choice and been remade by it. And the conquered got its report, though not the one HFYStories had first sat down to write. She wrote it 3 times. The first was too frightened. It read like a warning about a weapon, and the human was not a weapon, and the warden knew it and burned it. The second was too grateful. It read like the account of a rescue, and the human had not rescued them. She had only declined to let them die of their own neglect. And there is a difference, and the warden knew that too. The third one she kept and sent, and it was short, and Scarn read it because she showed it to him, one old soldier to another, before the lighter carried it up the well. It said, "The exchange did not send us a cadet. It sent us a courtesy." We spent 9 days testing the courtesy against our hardest instruments and our proudest houses and our oldest cruelty, and the courtesy held and did not break, and did not answer our provocations with anything but patience. And when our own neglect loosed a death we could not face, the courtesy went down alone and faced it and paid for it in her own blood and asked for nothing. We understand now what her rating means. Heroine is not the top of the scale. The top of the scale is a world that grew a people who could rate heroine and choose, every single day, to be quiet about it. That is the thing the exchange sent us, not a soldier. A demonstration of restraint by a people who have earned the right to have none, and keep it anyway as a discipline, as a kindness, as the only thing that makes them survivable to know. Recommend the conquered treat every human it meets as we should have treated this one on the first morning, as a guest whose patience is the most valuable and least renewable resource in the reach. Recommend we stop spending it. The Concord catalog was amended that year. Earth's designation was finalized, and the word the survey had recommended and no committee had dared to ratify was ratified at last. Hero absolute, the world at the end of the scale, the reason the scale had a shape at all. And beneath it, appended by a hand that was not a machine's, a single line was added to the entry. The addendum that the thin file had promised and never delivered, written now by Warden Ilex Scorin of Carold, who had earned the right to write it the hard way, over 9 days and 1 long night, and a great deal that she would spend the rest of her command trying to deserve. The dominant species is not dangerous because of what it can do. It is dangerous because of how little it needs to. Approach accordingly. Offer tea. Ren Calloway healed slowly. The cryocut was deep, and the leg would carry a long pale scar to match the old one through her eyebrow, and she spent the healing the way she spent everything, without complaint and without drama, doing the small work of getting a body to knit. And when she could sit up, doing the other small work she seemed unable to stop doing, which was fixing things. Tesh brought her broken instruments to the infirmary because it made her rest easier to have something in her hands, and she took them apart and diagnosed them and put them back together whole, and the college began to leave its failures at her door the way pilgrims leave offerings, not because they thought her divine, but because they had finally understood what she was, which was competent, all the way down, in a way none of their bred certainty had ever made any of them. And there was something about handing a broken thing to the quiet human and getting it back working that steadied the whole institution in the strange new season after the beast. She never boasted. She never once in all the time Scarn watched her referred to the coolant bay or the champion or the gauntlet or the boy with the stick. When cadets came, and they came, shy in the healing weeks, to stand near her cot and not quite ask the thing they wanted to ask, she talked to them about filters, about footing, about reading a room and reading a river and the one direction a committed thing cannot brace. She taught them, in the plain, flat voice she used for everything, the only lessons she seemed to think were worth teaching, which were never lessons about being strong, and always lessons about being careful, and about how the two were the same lesson on a world hard enough to teach it, and about how lucky they all were to have grown up somewhere that let them learn it slow. The test of whether a lesson has taken is never the lesson. It is the next season, when the ones who learned it are gone and only the change remains, and someone who was not there to see the blood does the old stupid thing and finds out the ground has moved beneath him. It came in the spring intake, 4 months after the coolant bay, on a morning Scarn would not have thought to remember except for how it ended. Wren was walking again by then, with a stick of her own, an actual cane, cut for her by Tesh from the black oak analog of a training stave, which was a joke the whole maintenance bay understood, and none of the warriors did. And she had taken to standing the dawn muster at the back of the ring, out of the way, watching, because she said watching a room was a thing worth doing even when nothing in it needed watching. Scarn had come to value her at the back of his muster more than he would have admitted. She saw things. She always saw things first. The new intake had a big one the way every intake has a big one. His name does not matter. The college has forgotten it, which is its own kind of justice. He was V. Harun, blue, black, and broad, the largest of the spring form, and he had spent 6 days doing exactly what Draska Vok had done, sizing the room, finding the smallest thing in it, deciding to make a lesson of it. And the smallest thing in the spring form was a neth even tinier than Asa, a first-year who glowed when she was frightened. And on the 6th morning the big V. Harun cornered her at the edge of the muster ring and reached down to push her head below the height of a real cadet. The old terrace gesture, the measuring, and he opened his mouth to give the ranks their morning's laughter. And the ranks did not laugh. Scarn watched it happen and did not move because he understood, the way you understand the weather has changed before you can say how, that he was not needed. Around the big V. Harun, the third form cadets, the ones who had been there, who had stood aside in the corridor and lowered their heads as the litter passed, went still, not afraid, ready. A Sethful whom Scarn recognized as one of Draska's surviving clan brothers, one of the 6 from the dark dormitory, stepped out of the ranks without being ordered and put himself between the big V. Harun and the glowing Neth first year, and said, in a flat, quiet voice that Scarn had last heard used by a small human eating a wafer, "You should put your hand down." The big V. Harun looked at him, and looked at the ranks, and understood slowly, with a dawning that Scarn had watched cross a great many faces that year, that the room he was standing in was not the room he thought he was standing in. He put his hand down. He did not know why the whole spring form was looking at him as if he had reached towards something that would take his arm. He did not know about the boy with the stick, or the knives in the dark, or the beast in the coolant bay, because he had not been there and the college did not talk about it directly, the way you do not talk directly about the thing that made you. He only knew that the ground had moved, and that the smallest creature in the room was, for reasons he could not name, under the protection of everyone larger, and that lifting a hand to it was no longer the safe and funny thing it had been on whatever world had raised him. He put his hand down and he stepped back, and he never troubled the Neth first year again, and that was the whole of it, and it was everything. At the back of the ring, leaning on a cane cut from a training stave, the human watched the boy put his hand down, and Scarn watched the human, and he saw her do a thing he had seen her do exactly once before, in the coolant bay, over the body of the beast. He saw her face ease. Not into a smile, she was not a woman who spent smiles cheaply, but into something quieter and more complete, the look of a craftsman who has come back to check a repair and found it holding, found the seal tight and the loop clear and the thing she fixed still fixed, months on, doing its quiet work without her. "That's the one that matters," she said to Scarn, not looking away from the ring. "Not the beast, not the champion, that." She nodded at the boy stepping back, the Neth uncornering herself, the ranks settling. "You can survive the loud lesson. Everyone remembers the loud lesson for a while. The quiet one is the only one that lasts, when the ones who saw it are gone and the change stays anyway, in people who never knew there was anything to change." She turned the cane in her hand, the black stave, the joke none of the warriors understood. "That's why I let it build all those days, not for you. For a first-year Neth I hadn't met yet on a morning I wasn't sure I'd be here to see, and here it is, so." She shifted her weight off the bad leg. "I can go home now." It took. Scarn had known the exchange was ending. The lighter was 3 days out, the certificate already drafted, the seat on the return manifest booked. But he had not let himself count the days, the way you do not count the days of a thing you are not ready to lose, and hearing her say it plainly at the back of his own muster, in the flat dawn light, he discovered that 40 years of command had not prepared him for it, and that he did not want them to have. "You could stay," he said, which was not a thing a master instructor said to a departing exchange cadet, and which he said anyway. Instructor track. The warden would sign it before the ink dried. "You have taught this college more in a season than I have in." "You've taught it more than me, Scarn." She said it flatly as fact, the way she said everything, and it was not modesty, and it stopped him cold. "I broke a boy's arm and killed a cat. Anybody hard enough could do that. You're the one who stood at the wrong grill with a fire axe and got the cadets moving, and carried the oral up the corridor when I told you to, and learned the fault tones 40 years before anyone else here bothered. You're the one they'll still be listening to when I'm a story they tell wrong. I do the loud lessons. You do the quiet ones every day for 40 years and nobody bows for it, and it's the harder work and the better work, and you'll never once get a litter carried past 200 lowered heads for it." She looked at him then, full on, her ordinary brown eyes and the 2 pale scars, and there was in her face the closest thing to warmth she had shown anyone on the moon. "Don't ask me to stay and do your job. Go do it. That's the only monument either of us is going to get, and it's the only one worth having." Then she went back to watching the ring, and Scarn stood beside her in the dawn light and watched it too, an old instructor and a small, scarred human leaning on a black cane, and neither of them said anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and both of them, in their different ways, had spent a lifetime learning the value of a thing left quiet. The lighter came down through the dome-filtered daylight 3 mornings later, the same battered supply hull that had brought her, and the college assembled to see her off, and no one had ordered them to. That was the thing Scarn would remember longest, longer even than the coolant bay. That on the morning the human left, Carroll formed up in the Great South Dome without a muster call, the whole of it, 200 cadets and 40 instructors and the kitchen Neth and old Vale the archivist and Tesh from the maintenance bay, and they stood in the flat white light in silence and waited for a small biped with a cane to cross the sand one last time. The warden stood at the head of them. The facilities master stood at the back, in the gray coverall of the maintenance cast now, having filed that season 411 work orders, one for each cadet the beast had taken over 11 years, a private penance no one had asked of him, and that he had chosen anyway, which was, Scarn thought, the beginning of the man becoming worth the sentence. Wren Calloway crossed the ring the way she had crossed everything, without hurry and without ceremony, a duffel over one shoulder and the black cane in her hand, and the same ill-considered indifference to 200 watching faces that she had worn while eating a wafer in the sand a season and a lifetime ago. She stopped in the center of the dome, where the champion had knelt and the gauntlet had run and the boy had swung, and she looked around at the assembled college with the mild attentiveness of someone confirming a delivery, and Scarn saw her understand, finally, that they had come for her, and saw her decide to accept it, not because she wanted it, but because refusing it would have cost them something, and she had never once, in a whole season, made any of them pay a cost she could spare them. Asa came out of the ranks first. The small Neth crossed the sand glowing faintly, not with terror now, Scarn realized, but with the other thing, the thing her people's light also meant, the thing they lit with when they were moved past the reach of their words, and she stopped in front of the human and held out in both soft hands a shawl clip. Not the broken one Wren had fixed on the second day. A new one, made, Scarn learned later, by Asa herself, over the healing weeks, from a fragment of the marrowcat's hide that the Neth had cured and worked with the patience of her engineering cast, so that the clip that held the softest creature's breathing shawl was cut from the deadliest predator the moon had ever kept, and the making of it said everything the Neth could not say aloud, which was, "You taught me that the small thing and the deadly thing are not opposites, and here is the proof, and I will wear it every day of my life." Wren took the clip. She looked at it a long moment, turning it in her fingers the way she turned everything, reading it, understanding the whole of it, the hide, the work, the meaning. And then she did a thing Skarn had never seen her do. She fixed it herself to her own coverall, over the heart, where a warrior culture pins its honors, and she crouched in front of Asa the way she had crouched in the wash hall on the second day, level, patient. And she said something to the small Neth that Skarn was not near enough to hear and did not try to, because some quiet things are meant to stay quiet, and he had learned that lesson from the best teacher the college had ever had. Draskavok came next. His arm had healed clean. He was third form now, near the top of it, a different boy inside the same red crest, and he crossed the sand and stood in front of the human who had broken his arm with a stick he handed her. And he did not know the Terrace forms for this, because there were none, so he improvised, which was itself a human thing he had learned from her, and did not know he had learned. He unpinned from his own coverall the gray mourning band his house had made him wear the season of his shame, the band that said a warrior of the terraces had been humbled, and he held it out to her, not as a burden past, but as a thing he no longer needed to carry, offered to the one who had made the carrying unnecessary. "My house sent me here to be made into a weapon," Draska said. "You made me into something else. I have not told them what. I'm not sure they have the word for it or that our language holds it, but I know it and it will do." He pressed the gray band into her free hand. "You said the only thing any of us got to keep from you was the choice. I have kept it. I keep choosing it. Every morning at the muster when the new ones do the old stupid thing, I keep choosing it. I will keep choosing it until I am an old master boring cadets who never met you with a proverb they think I invented." His crest lowered, the warrior's bow, given freely now and not in mourning. "Thank you for the stick. It is the most valuable thing anyone has ever handed me. I have thought about that a great deal, that I gave it to you to make you small, and you gave it back to me made into the whole shape of my life." Ren took the gray band and folded it, and put it in her pocket with the same neat economy she had once folded a ruined ration wrapper, and Skarn understood that she would keep it, that she kept all of it, the knives and the clip and the band, not as trophies but as maintenance records, the log of a thing repaired and left holding. The warden did not give her a certificate. Ilex Skorin had drafted one. The participation certificate the whole 9-day cruelty had originally been designed to end with, and she had burned it, because a certificate of participation was the last insult the college had left to offer, and the warden had finally learned better. Instead she gave the human a single folded sheet, and Skarn learned later what was written on it. A copy of the amended catalog entry, the Harrow Absolute designation and the addendum in the warden's own hand. Offer tea, so that Ren Calloway would carry home, in her own pocket, the proof that a warcollege of 30 proud houses had finally, at the cost of a beast and a season and a great deal of its certainty, learned to write the truth down. "When the next one comes through on the next treaty," Ilex Skorin said, "we will offer tea. You have my word and the word of this college, entered in the record where it cannot be marked low priority. We spent your patience for 9 days like it was ours to spend. We have learned the price of it. We will not spend the next ones." "Good," Ren said. "That's the whole job done, then." And she looked around the dome one last time at the assembled college, at the ranks that had stood aside and lowered their heads, at the Neth who kept them alive and the warriors who had finally learned to let them, and she shouldered her duffel, and she turned, and she walked toward the waiting lighter with her black cane and her marrowcat clip and a boy's gray band folded in her pocket, an ordinary small scarred person at the end of a long shift, going home. She did not make a speech. She did not look back. At the foot of the ramp she paused once, and Skarn thought she might, at the last, say something to the whole college, some final line that a warrior culture could carve over a door. She turned her head and found him in the crowd, the old master instructor who had watched a boy pick up a stick on the first morning and had not called out. And she spoke to him, only him, in the flat plain voice she used for the things that were true, loud enough to carry in the dome that had learned to be that silent. "Finish your muster, Skarn," Ren Calloway said. And then she went up the ramp, and the lighter closed, and it lifted through the dome-filtered daylight and was gone. And the college stood a while longer in the flat white light. 200 faces turned up to the empty sky, none of them speaking, until the old instructor at the back cleared his throat and squared his thorax, and did the last thing she had asked of him, the small, ordinary, necessary thing, the quiet work that no one bows for and that holds the whole institution up all the same. "Ranks," Scarn said, "now." And they formed ranks, faster than they had ever formed for him, and this time it was not fear that did it, and it was not the memory of the tide. It was that a small human had left them something better than fear, had left them the muster itself, the quiet daily discipline of showing up and standing straight and doing the careful thing before the loud thing, the exact discipline her hard green world had ground into her people, and that they, in their soft-worlded luck, had never had to learn until she came and taught them the easy way what her kind had learned the hard one. Scarn walked the ranks in the morning light and called the roll, and the roll was long, and every name answered, and at the end of it he came to the last line on the muster board, the transient row, the one bunk apart, and he read the name there that the college would leave on the board unstruck for as long as Scarn commanded the ring, a standing order no one ever questioned. Calloway Wren, present. She was 3 days gone up the well by then, and she was present, and she would be present at every muster Scarn ever called, and the small Neth would wear the deadliest thing on the moon over her heart, and a terrace boy would keep choosing the choice every morning until he was old, and none of the new ones would ever know why you don't lift a stick to the quiet ones, only that you don't, and that was the monument, and it was the only one worth having, and it would outlast them all. Scarn finished his muster. Then he went to the maintenance bay, where a broken instrument was waiting on Tesh's bench, and he sat down, and he took it apart to see how it worked,